Hello, my friends. Welcome back to Garhdo Goes Geek. On today's episode, we're going to be doing the second part of our preparation for the Doctor Who 60th anniversary. I'm going to be looking at the stories, the first bunch of stories from Steven Moffat's era as showrunner, by looking at the stories of the 11th Doctor, so played by Matt Smith. It's one of the more interesting eras. There's a lot of stuff that goes on. So hopefully you'll join me. I think it'll be interesting. This episode, like many others, was one that was originally planned for 2023 and was specifically planned to align with a major franchise anniversary and or something else that would serve as a talking point for the contents of this episode. However, like many other episodes, it was being released or recorded during the Writers Guild of America and SAG-AFTRA strikes against the American Motion Picture Association. As a result, this episode and many others have been held back because the clarification regarding content creation from SAG-AFTRA and the WGA specified that review content was allowed, including critical appraisal and or analysis of shows and films, however not discussion, interview, comedic conversation, watch-along, rewatch or reaction content. As I felt that this stipulation was something that would prevent me from discussing some of the topics that I wish to in the way that I wish to, even if the works I was discussing were not related to films that were in active development or were previous films. I did not want to breach the strikes, as I fully support the WGA and SAG-AFTRA in their strikes, as well as anyone else who decides to strike. If there is a strike, I am always on the side of the union striking, never on the side of the big corporate entities behind it. As a result, this episode has been held back. It is being released for you now that the strikes are over. I hope you will enjoy this content. I've worked very hard on it despite everything else. Please enjoy. Right, I'm not going to do too much of an intro on this one, at least in the same way that I did with the last Doctor Who episode I did. And the reason being because I kind of said everything about my history with the show there. I was already watching Doctor Who at this point. I was quite interested. I'd watched all of Series 4 as it aired. I watched the specials. While the specials were airing, I was able to go back and watch Series 1, 2, and 3. So I was caught up with Doctor Who by the time Series 5 started. I was aware that Russell T Davies had left. I knew obviously David Tennant had left as well. And from my perspective, Steven Moffat seemed like a great choice as to take over as showrunner. He'd had some of the strongest episodes under Russell T Davies's run. Not that I think Russell T Davies's episodes are bad, but they are a mixed bag. And I think his direction as showrunner, his efforts as showrunner are probably better than his efforts as a writer. But I was quite invested in this era. Steven Moffat's episodes are some of the best leading up to this era. Girl in the Fireplace, Empty Child and the Doctor Dances, Blink, for example, and Silence in the Library. I spoke about all of those in the previous episode, so I'm not going to reiterate too many of those points. But, it did make sense why he was, he took over. And that led us into our first episode, which was the 11th Hour. Now, it picks up straight after the first teaser appearance of Matt Smith as the Doctor that we got in the End of Time. And Matt Smith didn't make a great first impression. A lot of people really disliked the whole Geronimo thing that he did at the End of Time. And his whole still got legs and still not ginger, all that. A lot of people didn't really like this manic energy that he was bringing to the Doctor. And I get it, because the past two Doctors that we'd had been much more serious and down to earth, whereas Matt Smith being very young and very full of energy and being a bit manic and a bit bizarre, that to me feels like what the Doctor should be. The Doctor is an alien. He is a bit weird. And, I've not seen much classic Who. I've seen like clips here and there. But of some of the clips I've seen, Matt Smith's Doctor seems to fit quite well in with some of the classic Doctors, where they are a bit bizarre and things like his wardrobe that he comes up with during this series, where he ends up with the bow tie, the tweed jacket. It's an old man in a young man's body, which also fits because the Doctor's like over 900 years old. We get introduced to the new companion as well. The new companion is Amy Pond, who we first get introduced to as Little Amelia Pond. I really like Amy. And I think both Karen Gillan, who plays obviously older Amy, and her cousin, her real life cousin, who they hadn't actually met until they were both cast in this episode, which I think is a great bit of trivia. I think her cousin's name is Caitlin Blackwood, I want to say. They both do a great job as the character. Like, Amelia is very different, but you can see elements of what becomes Amy. The way she handles herself, the way she just isn't intimidated by the Doctor at all. And, not that I think children should be intimidated by the Doctor, but she just finds him weird. And obviously then, how that ties into the cracks and the cracks in the wall, and how the Doctor points out that it must be a heck of a crack if she's scared about that when she doesn't seem fazed by anything else. The only thing is, with the concept of the crack, while it's really interesting, the effect they've had on Amy does make her perhaps a bit more special than most of the companions we've had before. She's got a bit more going on. And your mileage may vary on that. I'm not entirely keen on like the ultra important kind of destined companion almost. But I think Amy won me over because of her actual personality as well. So Rory gets introduced as well. He's not brilliantly introduced here. He's a decent character from what we see of him. He's clearly clever, but he's lacking in confidence because of Amy. I do like as well, though, that he gets noticed by the Doctor because while there's a spaceship flying overhead, he's the only person not looking at it. And that's, I'm not sure about the frantic camera movements that we have there for that. That's a bit Sherlocky. And obviously Steven Moffat would go on to be the showrunner for Sherlock as well. But it does highlight that it's the characters doing unexpected things that the Doctor takes notice of, which works for me really well. It's a shame that Olivia Colman's role is so small in this episode, because obviously she went on to be, an Oscar-winning actress. She is a great actress. But yeah, she's only got like quite a tiny role in this episode, which is a real shame. And I do like the running joke of Amy continually waiting for the Doctor. And when the Doctor does finally turn back up, and like people thought she was a bit crazy going on about this Raggedy Man. And that gets explored later on as well. But the Doctor's come back, and so she runs off with him. And then we pan over and reveal her wedding dress. She says she has to be back by the next morning, and the next morning is her wedding day. That's interesting. That's one way to do the sort of bridal jitters, run away with a madman in a box. Because this is very much the madman in a box era of Doctor Who, and I'm fine with that. Beast Below is the second episode. Great concept. I haven't spoke much about the actual what actually happens in 11th Hour. It's mainly just a way of introducing the characters. The plot is relatively simple. Beast Below has a really great concept for an episode. There's, you know, Starship UK flying through space. There's a secret to it, and if you find out the secret, you have to vote. And you have to vote whether to keep the secret. And everyone always seems to vote to keep the secret, which is really dystopian. Really, really dystopian, and I like that. I also like how the Doctor uses the child, Nancy, to explain things to Amy, like explain things around them, and you know, it's Nancy that gets his attention because she's crying. Um, you know, and then the reveal of what Starship UK is. Liz 10 is in this as well. Liz 10 is a great character who only appears once more after this, but she's a lot of fun. You know, I'm the bloody queen, mate. Love it. So much fun. And then you reveal the secret, which is that it's this enslaved star whale, and you get the comparisons between the whale and the Doctor, especially how they react to crying children. It's just lovely, and it's Amy that realizes it. Like, the Doctor is preparing to euthanize the whale because he feels that the humans have put him in that position, and he's angry about it, like, understandably. And then Amy makes him realize, no, we can do something else, and it's just this really lovely turnaround as we go from this really dark moment to this, actually, no, this real humanitarian, um you know, light moment where it's like, no, there's hope, and there's, you know, the whale actually wants to be here. He wants to help the people, especially the children. Yeah, I like that. And yeah, like I said, the contrast of them both being the last of their kind, and you know, what would that do to someone, making them, you know, old and kind, you know, because someone who had lived that long would be kind. Yeah, I like that. And then, of course, you get the reveal of a crack as like a great little sting right at the end, which is indicating that these cracks are everywhere, which is something that goes on again. The third episode, Victory of the Daleks. This one is okay. I do like this one. It's not. It's written by Mark Gatiss. It's one of Mark Gatiss's better episodes. You know, he has a bit of a mixed bag with Doctor Who. The Dalek plan is very interesting. You know, I love the larger design of the new Daleks, although it is just done because the Daleks in Dalek were based so that, you know, when they were redesigned for Dalek, it was designed so that they would be at the eye level for Billie Piper playing Rose. Karen Gillan is a lot taller than Billie Piper, so that's the main reason the Daleks were redesigned. I do get why the color coding for the Daleks does seem to be derided. Like I've seen a lot of people compare it quite negatively to something like Power Rangers. I don't hate it. Like, I think it would be cool if we saw it in rather than just these five, if we saw like a more functional army of Daleks, you know, where all the army were one color, and then we saw like a superior and the odd scientist or the odd one of the other. That could be cool. But I think because we get, for the most part, we just get these five for this episode, you know, it's not great. But it's the idea that the Daleks are back and kind of reinventing them a bit. Ian McNeice plays Churchill here. He goes on to be a bit of a recurring character through this era. He's not bad. He's really good in the role. He feels like Churchill, although it does kind of fall prey to like a surface level praising of Churchill and not wanting to dig into him. Churchill, he he led Britain through a very, very dark time in World War II. Don't get me wrong, I don't want to ever, um, knock that. And I get the perspective he's had, but he's quite a polarizing historical figure. Like, if you actually look at a lot of things he's done and things he said, and some of it is very much of the time, some of it was outdated even for the 40s or 50s where he was saying these things. He's not necessarily and then you reveal, like, okay, yes, he was leading Britain through the Blitz, but while everyone else in the country was on rations, he was dining on like turtle soup and fine cut steak. He wasn't, and I don't know. Churchill to me is a very complicated figure. I have very, very mixed feelings about the man. And this doesn't quite get into the level of like Churchill praising, but it's like he's a very positive character here. Understandably, because of what they're trying to do. He's one of the heroes of the episode. Bracewell's emotional countdown as well is done quite well. And again, it's Amy that provides the insight that saves the day, because the Doctor's trying to get him to focus on the pain, and Amy's like, no, focus on the good things. And that's what actually helps him and stops the bomb from going off. I like that. I also quite like the military Daleks that have got like the pouches and the green paint. That something quite twee about it. And then of course you get Danny Boy in his Spitfire. That's quite cool as well. The idea as well that Amy has forgotten the Daleks is a really interesting wrinkle, because obviously the Daleks attacked in Journey's End, and like the whole idea of the Earth being stolen, because it's like Russell T Davies's era had a lot of these big events happen on Earth, as Turn Left demonstrated, and like Donna always found a way to kind of miss them. But when you have things like a Dalek invasion and all the planets in the sky change and things like that, that's a bit different. Like, you have to come up with a reason why people don't remember that. It's like, to use the example of the MCU, like all of the television series that were associated with the MCU all reference the Battle of New York because it was too big an event to ignore. This, though, has just gone, well, people have forgotten about it. And then it's like, oh, that's a mystery. Why have they forgotten about it? And unfortunately, I don't think they ever explain it properly. But it's almost like the idea that these things weren't meant to happen, so people forget about them. I don't know. I wish it was more of a plot point than it is. It's just like this nice, interesting wrinkle. It's decent enough for what it is. Then you get Time of Angels and Flesh and Stone, the first two-parter of the series, where you get this triumphant return of both River Song and the Weeping Angels. Combines them together in this really good two-part episode that also is the first one that really expands on the concept of the cracks, mainly in the Flesh and Stone half. The Time of Angels part is more focusing on River and the Angels. But when it introduces the cracks in Flesh and Stone, it shows that they're wiping people from history. And that's really good. Like that scene where the soldiers are going off and disappearing, and then one of the other soldiers is like, I need to go find out what's going on. And Amy's like, well, what about the other one? Like, what other one? Amy's the only person that can remember them, which is obviously because of the crack in her bedroom wall when she was a child. But it gives her an insight here, which just allows her to kind of save things. There was as well the a bit with the continuity error that people pointed out with the Doctor wearing his jacket after he got rid of it. And it's like, well, that will make sense later on, so we'll ignore that. That was like done deliberately, and I quite like it. Um, but yeah, I think this two-parter is very, very well paced. It's got a lot of great twists that just keep escalating the threat. First of all, it's one angel. Then it's like, oh no, all these statues are angels. There's actually an army of them and they're all waking up. And then how that evolves once they get into the ship to the crack. That's really good and keeps it building, keeps the threat, but then also gets rid of the angels at the end as well. So works quite well. You get to see the Doctor clashing with the soldiers. The idea of the being church soldiers, yeah, makes perfect sense. River's connection to the Doctor as well is great, and so's Octavian. Actually, speaking of the soldiers, he's really good and gets some amazing lines. And he's played by the actor who played Jorah Mormont in is it Ian Glenn? Yes, Ian Glenn, who played Jorah Mormont in Game of Thrones. He's really good. I'd seen him in a few things by this point, and I quite like him. I think he's a great actor. He does character stuff very well. And yeah, he gets some really good lines here. Like lines pointing out the bravery of his soldiers and, sort of scolding the Doctor. I quite like it when the Doctor gets challenged. And some characters do it really well, some characters don't. Octavian gets some really good lines that challenge him. I do also think that 11 and River instantly have better chemistry than 10 and River. Now, it's not to say that Tennant and River had no chemistry, because they did, but I think the chemistry between Matt Smith and Alex Kingston as River is just more interesting. Like, there's a bit more flirting on Smith's part as well, because he's obviously now familiar with River and kind of has an idea of who she's going to be, whereas Tennant didn't. But also, perhaps as well, probably because Kingston's a bit older than Smith, which puts him on the back foot. And it gives River the kind of the power in their dynamic. Because Tennant's Doctor was very commanding, whereas Smith, he's still the Doctor, he's still commanding, but not in quite the same way immediately. And of course, Amy adds to this as well by just needling the Doctor with their own relationship. She's just constantly like needling him about, oh, who's she? Is she a wife? Is she, what is this? And you get some kind of hints of River's future, but her past. It's clever because obviously she's meeting the Doctor out of order. So River's past is her future in the show, if that makes sense. The episode does end with a scene that I don't like, though, which is where they go back to Earth and Amy kind of throws herself at the Doctor. Now, I understand why, but I could do without it. I don't think it makes Amy come off well, and I think it kind of hurts her character overall. And I get it. They've been through a traumatic experience. She's got the wedding night jitters. They've just been hanging together for the past few days and, in these really intense situations. So I totally understand why it happens. Doesn't mean I like it. But obviously the way that the Doctor decides to resolve this is to go and get Rory. So the next episode, Vampires of Venice, is not only a great story in itself, but it's our reintroduction to Rory, with the Doctor coming out of his, the stripper cake at his bachelor party, which is hilarious. And Rory instantly provides a very different dynamic between him and the Doctor, with him like immediately, well, not immediately, but like he calls the Doctor out for all of this kind of selfless behavior that he inspires in the people around him. Because obviously Rory notices this in Amy, that Amy has changed and that, the Doctor has inspired something too. And, this is something that Davros challenged the Doctor about in Journey's End as well. The idea that he inspires people around him to do some quite reckless things sometimes. But then obviously Rory goes and falls victim to it himself, which is quite interesting. Even within this episode, he ends up, playing the hero at some points and, doing these quite active roles. We also get a really good look at his relationship with Amy and showing that while she does have feelings for the Doctor, she does love Rory. Like, she cares about the Doctor, but it's Rory she's in love with. He still doesn't seem quite so convinced about it, because obviously he knows what happened at the end of the last episode. But yeah, and that's something that will build and continue building throughout a lot of their episodes, which, again, I like. The vampires in this are an interesting threat as they expand on the silence and the cracks, and you also have Rosanna's final words kind of providing a great little twist for the Doctor, and like they actually get spoken again over the final scene. After we've had this this great banter for the three of them. And it shows how strong that the three of them will go on to become as a group. But the Doctor kind of gets his first kind of clue as to what's going to happen, what this big threat is. With the silence and the cracks, the silence being on the other side of the cracks. It's intriguing. This episode was by Toby Whitehouse. It was his second episode. He also wrote School Reunion, which is another episode where characters challenge the Doctor, although in that case it was a lot more lighthearted than it is here with Rory. He will go on to write some other very strong episodes. So he's a writer I quite like on Doctor Who. Amy's Choice is the final episode I'm going to cover for this section before I move on. This is just a fantastic little episode. It's anchored by these brilliant core performances of the main three characters, and obviously the guest performance of Toby Jones as the Dream Lord. He's just thoroughly entertaining in like every scene he's in, and it's helped by the script. The script is really, really good for this one. I'm just checking who wrote it. It was written by Simon Nye, and I don't know if he did any other Doctor Who episodes. But yeah, no, it is just Amy's Choice, and it's a shame because this episode is really, really good. And it's the lines he gives to the Dream Lord and how he's taunting them, especially the Doctor. The old villagers provide the more traditional Doctor Who threat, and they work fine enough. Aliens possessing old people. Whereas the other threat inside the TARDIS is like a cold star, and it's not quite as terrifying or traditionally Doctor Who. The most powerful emotional beat in the whole episode, though, comes with Amy making her choice because Rory dies. And it shows just how much their relationship truly means to her. And, it's like she doesn't care whether it's the right choice to make or not. All she knows is that she can't live without Rory. So if Rory's dead, she doesn't want to be alive either. And it's like, that's powerful stuff. It's really good. And obviously the reveal of who the Dream Lord is as well, because obviously, the Doctor, like you said, there's only one person who could hate him that much. Very, very nicely done. But yeah, it was just a brilliant episode. It's definitely one of the best of the season. Yeah, definitely one of the best of the series. Very, very strong. But all in all, this run of episodes, I think, provides a really good introduction to this team in the TARDIS. And, focuses really well on Matt Smith, gives us a really good indication across his first few episodes of who he is and what sort of doctor he is, his relationship with Amy, and then bringing Rory onto the team is perfect. Like, I really like that Rory's in there as a companion as well. So, the rest of Series 5, the first episode after Amy's Choice is another two-parter. It's Hungry Earth and Cold Blood. And it's quite a menacing little two-parter. It brings back the Silurians, who are obviously a classic Doctor Who enemy, haven't been seen in the modern series. It's okay. The cliffhanger for the first episode, though, is quite clumsy and sudden. Like, it happens really quickly. And it's a shame because the second episode sort of takes on a slightly different tone, with the voiceovers and stuff. So it's kind of a bit disjointed. I wish it had been paced a bit better and maybe we'd had those voiceovers in the first episode as well, kind of tying it all together. The extended cast of characters for this episode, they are pretty interesting though. You've got the human characters, you've got a family that's all kind of linked, and a really good exploration of all of the relationships between them. And what their stakes are. The only problem is that the conclusion of the episode, the conclusion of the Silurian story of the episode, I should say, is kind of very heavily telegraphed by both the Doctor's dialogue and Alea's dialogue. Alea being the Silurian in this. And, obviously it's really telegraphed that one of the humans is going to kill her and Alea's going to end up dead. And it just seems inevitable from the minute it's kind of hinted at. It's like the Doctor's like, oh, just keep calm. No one lose their temper. No one let anything bad happen. And then Alea's like, one of you is going to kill me. And it's like, oh, okay, so that's what's going to happen then. Someone's going to die. And then we hear the Doctor saying again, just remember, everyone stay calm. Kind of a finger wag. And it's like, yeah, I get what they're doing with it. But it's like so heavily signposted that this is what's going to happen. The Silurians themselves, though, they're a great returning enemy, and they get given like quite an interesting like visual makeover. The Silurian troops look quite cool, and I think most of them are women as well. So most of the troops we see for the Silurians are female, and obviously it makes them quite visually distinct from a lot of the other aliens we see, which are mostly male. Like, for example, the Ood all look, male as far as we see. They're all taller, broad-shouldered. The Silurians are a bit smaller, a bit slighter, a bit more athletic. It's a very different look, and it creates a very distinct silhouette for them. The episode itself is perfectly fine. The only problem I have with it is the most notable part of the whole episodes, the whole story, is nothing to do with the main story itself. Nothing to do with the Silurians, nothing to do with the guest characters. All of that's handled really well, and it's resolved really well. And is it Neve McIntosh who plays Alaya? She's doing a brilliant job playing double duty because she plays Alaya and then the other Silurian leader, I've forgotten her name. And obviously she would go on to play Madame Vastra as well throughout this era. And she's doing a great job here playing the two characters because they are similar, but they do feel different. Um, but yeah, the most notable part of the episode is part of the meta plot for the series, which is where Rory gets erased from time by a crack, and the Doctor gets the wreckage of the TARDIS from the crack. And it kind of overpowers the conclusion of the Silurian story, because we see Amy just changed drastically. She forgets Rory. And it's like we get the opening at the start where we see like future Rory and future Amy in the distance kind of waving. And then we go back to the end of the episode and it's just Amy, because Rory's completely gone, wiped from history. And yeah, it just overpowers and detracts from the story. Like the actual Silurian story, like I said, really good. It's a really great reintroduction to this classic enemy. And, the decisions made by all the human characters make perfect sense. Even the one that does the thing they shouldn't. It all makes perfect sense. I'm not going to spoil it too much for anyone who hasn't seen the episode, because I recommend seeing it. Although I am spoiling a lot of stuff, so. But yeah, the meta plot changes everything, and it's similar in a way to what was done in Flesh and Stone, but it feels more egregious here, because Flesh and Stone had all these other mystery plot lines, and the crack just tied into everything else that was going on. Like, it didn't detract from what was happening with River, it didn't detract what was happening with Octavian and the Angels. It was all it was part of it. The crack happened quite early in Flesh and Stone and became like part of the plot of the whole story. In this, the crack is like right at the end. And so it kind of stands out as like separate from the main events of the story. Both of these episodes are also from future showrunner Chris Chibnall. And while I don't think they're the best episodes he's written for Doctor Who, those will come later on in this era, I do think they are very good. They are good, despite what I've just said about how much the ending kind of detracts. Like, the actual Silurian story is solid, like I said. Perhaps a bit heavily telegraphed with what's going to happen to Alea, but it's decent enough. And they're both far more engaging than his previous effort, which was 42. I wasn't a huge fan of that episode. But yeah, it just feels like this great story loses its way because of something tacked on to tie it in with the rest of the series. The next episode is Vincent and the Doctor. Vincent and the Doctor is one of probably the most famous, most notable episodes of Doctor Who. It was written by Richard Curtis, as in the guy who writes all the, the same Richard Curtis who's written British television for years. He's the one that's won BAFTAs for like, all of his work on television with things like Blackadder, Mr. Bean, Vicar of Dibley. He's won he wrote the Bridget Jones movies. He wrote Notting Hill. He wrote Four Weddings and a Funeral, Love Actually. He's written a lot of amazing stuff. No matter how much you are a fan of romantic comedies, I'm not a huge fan of them, but I love a lot of his television work. Vicar of Dibley and Blackadder are two of the funniest shows I've ever seen. So he does a great episode here. It's really good. It's this beautiful and, like I said, very well regarded episode, and for a very good reason. It profiles Vincent van Gogh, who obviously was, quite a traumatized figure in real life, and this episode handles it perfectly. There's no simplification. There's no trying to hide the darkness. He is just this really very well realized character, which is just perfect. The way it's done in this episode. And Tony Curran playing Vincent Van Gogh is absolutely fantastic. He does such a good job in the role of, exploring the idea of what Vincent's going through with his mental health. And yeah, it strikes a chord with me, someone who struggles with my own mental health, not quite in the same way as Vincent. Vincent was a very traumatized individual. But as someone who does struggle with mental health, I like that this episode just tackles it head on. And this is up there as this is one of the episodes that makes me cry. Um the final scenes, Vincent's culminating scene in the episode where the Doctor brings him to his gallery, the gallery of all of Vincent's work in the future, and speaks to Bill Nighy's curator character um to sort of ask him about Vincent's legacy, and Vincent just breaks down, seeing how, because in his own life, he was not a well-regarded artist. He was a struggling, poor artist for a lot of his life. A lot of people wrote off his works. He's now considered one of the finest painters who's ever lived. And, the idea that obviously the character in real life never got, Vincent in real life never got to understand that, the legacy that he would leave. But in this, he does. And yeah, I love that. It's a beautiful scene. And then the fact that even with that, Vincent's past doesn't change. He still takes his life because of how overwhelmed he was. And what the Doctor says about good days and bad days. And, everyone's life being good days and bad days. And it's like, the good days don't necessarily drown out the bad, but they added to his pile of good days. Yeah. I'm tearing up now thinking about it. It's a great episode. It really is. It's probably the best episode this season, this series. And probably one of the best episodes of Doctor Who overall. Like, it's not a very Doctor Who episode. Like how some people say, like, for Star Trek, for example, people say, oh, an episode doesn't feel like a Star Trek episode. It's a good episode, but it's not a Star Trek episode. Vincent and the Doctor, it may not be the most Doctor Who episode, although there are some good moments in it. The Doctor chasing a monster that he can't see with some sort of, using a mirror, like a moped wing mirror on this gadget that he's got on his chest, But the actual episode itself is, yeah, it's just sublime. It's fantastic. We then get The Lodger, which is the closest we probably have to like a companion light episode this series. Like, Amy's still in it, but she's kind of trapped in the TARDIS, so we don't get a lot of time with her. Instead, we give the Doctor a new companion in Craig. And while I can kind of struggle with James Corden in a lot of his roles, and I especially do not think he's a particularly great figure in real life, he seems to be, very. I've heard a lot of problematic things about James Corden, but honestly, I do quite like Craig. I like how the character's written. I like how James Corden is portraying him quite earnestly. And unlike, for example, James Corden, other big famous television role of Smithy in Gavin and Stacey, Craig is likable. Smithy isn't. Like, Craig is really likable, really earnest. And yeah, it's good. It's a great episode for the Doctor. He gets a lot of interesting moments doing things that we never normally see, like playing football or cooking. And or just tidying the house because he's bored, you know. Oh no, that's a different episode I'm thinking of there. And the whole threat of the episode builds quite well. It's this slow building thing, and then there's like the idea of there's the mystery about why it never targets Craig or Sophie. And again, their love story, by the way, perfectly charming. I absolutely love it. And then, of course, we get the hook for the finale where Amy finds Rory's ring in the TARDIS. Yeah, very, very good episode. I like this one. I think some people have derided it, but yeah, I don't think it's a bad one at all. And then we get the finale for the series, which is the Pandorica opens and Big Bang. 2-part finale. And the opening to this is quite possibly one of my favourite Doctor Who finale openings ever. It brings back Vincent, brings back Churchill, Bracewell, Liz 10, all the way through to River. And I think it's just a great way to tie many of the episodes of the series together by bringing back all these characters like a final time. Vincent painted a picture which Churchill ends up with, talks to Bracewell about it. It ends up going into the National Archives, which means Liz 10 has it on Starship UK, and that's how River finds it. That's smart. I like that. And then we get this building mystery of what the Pandorica is. We get to reintroduce Rory as a Roman. Like, Rory's back, along with a whole load of Roman soldiers, because River pretends to be Cleopatra, because of course she does. We get hordes of enemies. We get a whole load of enemy ships, Cybermen, Daleks, Sontarans. They're all in space, all around the Earth. And it explores the capabilities of the Pandorica. It's got all these quantum locks and all these things going on. And all these coincidences with Amy that all tie together right towards the end as the trap gets revealed and then sprung on the Doctor. Really great story. Got some very good moments, like Rory and the Doctor together, like, because obviously the Doctor remembers Rory. That bit's the way he's kind of like, you died. It's like, yeah, I did. It's interesting. And the final moment where Amy kind of remembers the Doctor as remembers Rory as well. That's really clever. And obviously the Doctor's speech on top of Stonehenge to all of his aliens, remember all the times I ever beat you, and then let someone else try first. Yeah, it works quite well, and I like the cliffhanger for the finale. I think the much more human-looking Autons that we get with the Romans are great, and the reveal that they are Autons, including Rory, very good. The return of Christopher Ryan as a Sontaran again, because obviously Sontarans are clones, so we get this, and again, another familiar face playing a Sontaran. The finale itself, I think, while probably not as great as the first half, like Pandorica Opens is a really good building mystery. Big Bang is kind of a bit of a mad dash with a lot of time travel. It is still a very interesting episode, though. We get the return of Amelia. We get this really good character evolution for Rory. We get the scene of River making a Dalek beg for mercy, which is just fantastic. But it does have a lot of like time travel Deus Ex Machina. Starting with the moment that Rory cradling Amy, the Doctor arrives to him. And this is the first time that we really get Moffat doing this, where he's using a lot of clever time travel shenanigans to kind of write himself out of a corner. And it's only clear when watching this episode, like, just how long this had been planned, because obviously it overlaps with Flesh and Stone. You know, the continuity error that everyone pointed out on the internet. It's like, oh, it's not a continuity error, it's planned, it ties into the finale. And while it's a little easy, you know, it's one of those, oh, we'll just use time travel shenanigans. It's not, it's got elements of the Bill and Ted thing. Like, there's a bit in Bill and Ted where I've forgotten which one of the two movies it is, but one of the movies, and they're like, oh, well, after we're done with this, we could just do this, and then we leave something here for us to find. It's like, okay, cool. Where would we put it? I don't know. Maybe here. And then they reach that, and that's where it is. Because it's like, and then it's like, okay, cool. We have to remember to do this. So it's like, yeah, everything kind of ends up in the way it does because of the Doctor's time travel with the vortex manipulator. I don't know. It's... Does it work well as a conclusion? Yeah, probably. But it's a lot of jumping around, and, you know, it's maybe a bit too... You know, oh, we've written ourselves into a corner. Let's use some fancy time travel stuff to get ourselves out. And most Doctor Who stories aren't like that. They don't use time travel in that way. Time travel is used to get the Doctor to the setting, not to solve the mystery, not to fix the problem. So, you know, that's something where your mileage may vary with a lot of Moffat stories, because it does become something that he starts to lean on a bit more. And this is like the first real example. I mean, he did use this device in Blink as well, you know, as a storytelling device. And like with Blink, everything is accounted for. You know, every, you know, because I think it's kind of easy to write it off, but it has to be done well. And for the most part, Steven Moffat does do it well. He ties every knot, you know, because it's time travel. You have to close every loop. Everything has to be connected. There's only one episode I can think of that comes later on that does a lot of time travel stuff like this that I don't like. And I'll get to that when I get to it. It's going to be in the next episode. But yeah, and then I quite like the idea of Amy managing to bring the Doctor back at the wedding day. You know, it does feel like a bit cheesy. And there are plenty of like hooks in the final moments that are obviously clearly designed to lead into the next series, like such as Who River is. But yeah, I don't know. I like it. It's just a nice conclusion. It's a bit twee, but at points, you know, with the wedding and everything like that. But it's perfectly fine. It's charming enough for what it is, and you know the whole idea of everything in the universe dying and then having to be reborn, and it's all because of the TARDIS and things like that. That's it's kind of cool. It's kind of clever. I like it. And then we get the Christmas special, because yes, the Christmas special's returned. And the first one, the Christmas Carol, honestly, a pretty good one. I'm a bit hit or miss on the Christmas specials. Like, I'm not always a huge fan of them. This one's pretty good. You know, it's sort of inspired by the classic Christmas Carol story, but it's also set completely away from Earth. It's on a completely different planet. And it adapts many of the moments of the classic story in a really interesting way. Again, playing with time travel and time manipulation in a similar way to the previous story, which is the worst thing about it, because obviously when I was watching these back, you're watching two episodes where a lot of time travel's happening in a row, which becomes a bit egregious. Now, obviously, when it was actually airing, there was about 6 months in between the two, so it's not quite so bad there. And in this case, obviously, it's all anchored by Kazran Sardik, who is a very well realized character, and obviously played brilliantly by Michael Gambon in the sort of the modern day of the story. Um, but both of his younger versions do a really good job as well, playing the role, and you can see the character, you can see who he is, and obviously then you get Abigail as well. Um, is it Catherine Jenkins, the singer? She's good. I've not seen her act in anything before. I know she has acted, but obviously she does theatre, so I haven't seen her act. So yeah, she's good enough. I like what she's doing. The interesting thing of the episode, though, and this is the twist that I quite like, is it seems that by the Doctor attempting to help, he's the one that actually steals Kazran against helping in the first place. Because obviously it turns out he's running down Abigail's clock and she's dying. Um, but yeah, it's good, and we get a nice conclusion, a nice ending. There's a couple of really great scenes, like Child Kazran and the Doctor with the shark. That's very clever. The way they use the sort of the Ghost of Christmas Future um, element in this story, really clever. Really like that. And yeah, it's probably my favorite of the Christmas specials so far. Um, and like if you ask me to rank all of my all of the Doctor Who Christmas specials, this one, yeah, it feels Christmassy in the best way, because obviously it's adapting a classic Christmas story, but it's doing it in a very new and unique sci-fi twist. And yeah, I like it. It's a good one. Right, Series 6 seems to turn a few things on its head. Um, up until now, all of the Doctor Who series of the modern era have kind of followed a set formula where you get like, 2 or 3 episodes, then a two-parter, um, then another couple of episodes, then another two-parter, then maybe one or two final ones, and then a final two-parter to close it. And obviously, they're all 13 episodes. This series, though, doesn't end with a two-parter, but it does start with one. And the first 2 episodes are Impossible Astronaut and Day of the Moon. Now, this also echoes a time where the budget just got a lot bigger. Up until now, Doctor Who has kind of like the budget's been increasing every season. Like the BBC put a lot of money into Doctor Who to bring it back in the first place, and then obviously they just kept building on it, and it's been very successful for them. Like Doctor Who has become a very successful show in its modern day, and as understandably so. And as a result, the BBC has put a lot more money into it, and you started to get location shooting. And obviously, there was location shooting anyway, but the BBC films Doctor Who in Wales. And there's only so many times you can paint up a Welsh quarry to look like an alien planet. In this, though, for Series 6, Doctor Who starts to go global. And that's because these first 2 episodes, parts of them were shot in America. And, there's a bigger budget, there's some American cast members. It's very good, actually. I don't know if they were the first episodes to film abroad. I don't think they were. There was a two-parter set in New York in Series 3. If they didn't film some of that in New York, I'd be very surprised. Although I could believe if they hadn't. Um, but yeah, so you start with these two exceedingly well-written episodes. Like, they're very well paced stories. They're very different stories, but they're linked quite tightly. They both feel quite different in tone as well, I think. Impossible Astronaut is like, they both have a mystery element to them. But Impossible Astronaut is kind of the setup of the mystery. Then Day of the Moon starts in a very dramatic fashion before kind of slowing down again. But yeah, so they do feel different, but there's a lot of similarities and overlap between them. I think they do a great job of introducing the meta plot of this series, which is the idea that in the future the Doctor is going to die. And it starts with Impossible Astronaut. The Doctor, who's several hundred years older than the Doctor they last saw, has invited them to the site of his death, River, Amy, and Rory, to Lake Silencio, where he's going to die. And this astronaut comes out of the water, shoots the Doctor, and then shoots him again before he can regenerate. And that's it. The Doctor's dead. And yeah. And then, of course, they go and find a younger version of the Doctor who wasn't there. And they also find an old man turns up who helps them get rid of the Doctor's body, who's called Canton Everett Delaware III. And he, for me, is a proper highlight of this episode. I think Mark Sheppard plays him brilliantly. I like Mark Sheppard as well. He's, again, one of those actors who's done so much stuff. He's kind of most well known for a recurring role that he's had in Supernatural. I think it's Castile, wasn't it? I don't know. I've never seen Supernatural. But yeah, he's a recurring character in that, but he's been in so much stuff. He's been in Star Trek, he's been in Battlestar Galactica, he's been in so much television over the years. And the older version of him is played by his father, who is also an actor. He was in Star Trek 6, and is one thing I know him from. And yeah, and then we get introduced to the new villains, who are the Silence, and they have a really interesting concept, in a similar way to like the Weeping Angels, where it's like they can only move if you're not looking at them. The Silence, if you're looking at them, you remember them. The minute you look away, you forget all about them. The moment the Silence are not in your eyesight, you cannot remember anything about them. So clever. Like, that's a really interesting concept and set of abilities. And we also get the idea that Amy might be pregnant, but then it might also be a false alarm, and that's kind of teased at the end of the episode. Like, is it? So that's a mystery going on as well. They even managed to reuse a set from the Lodger, but work it into the story that it looks like the set in the Lodger. It's so clever, and it really, really works well. And yeah, and I like the idea that the Silence kind of undo themselves with their own actions. Like, it's kind of undone by their own hubris kind of thing. So yeah, I like it. And there's lots of hints as to who the astronaut is. We see this young girl, and we see her regenerate. We see, lots of nice twists. And it's all just setting up the meta plot for the season, while also being a very satisfying story in its own right. And Canton's great. Like, I want Canton to come back. He's introduced here. He's a possible companion, possible ally, and unfortunately, completely yet to return. I'd love to see him come back again. Maybe a story featuring him a bit later in his timeline with a new version of the Doctor. That could be quite interesting. But at the minute, it just seems, the further away in time we get from this episode, the more and more unlikely it seems, which is a shame. Curse of the Black Spot, the third episode of the season, it's quite a fun one, and it's one where everyone lives. Um, we may not see everyone live, but everyone does live, and that's a rarity in Doctor Who. Um, it's a perfectly fine episode in its own right, but in the grand scheme of everything, it's unfortunately rather forgettable. Um, despite the fact it's a very serviceable plot, it's got great supporting players, it's got an interesting mystery, it's got this pretty fun concept, but unfortunately nothing about it really lasts over long in your memory. It's just the pirate episode. And it's decent enough, and I like the twist, of what the siren is. Um and the fact they're shooting it on an old style ship, and they've got this full set to play around with, and it just looks good. It looks really good. But then the fourth episode is the Doctor's wife, and I think that's part of the problem, is that Curse of the Black Spot is sandwiched between Day of the Moon and the Doctor's wife, which are two very, very good episodes, so it just kind of comes across as a bit forgettable. The Doctor's wife is the debut episode of Doctor Who by Neil Gaiman, and and it is just as amazing as those words suggest. It's Neil Gaiman's debut episode of Doctor Who. What more do you need to say about it? It's very well written. It's got some incredible lines in it. Like, there's some very, very quotable lines in this episode from quite a lot of the characters, especially the villain House, who is played by Michael Sheen and is fantastic. Like, voiceover only, but what a voice. Saran Jones, who's playing Idris, she has some incredible lines. She's just absolutely brilliant, thoroughly engaging, and gives a voice to a character who hasn't had one ever, despite being part of the show since the beginning. And that's because, she gets to embody the TARDIS. And yeah, what an episode. There's some really great moments in here. I like you know, I like the kind of the dark horror of House toying with Amy in the TARDIS using these illusions of Rory. I like the chemistry between Idris and the Doctor. When Idris is the TARDIS, and the way she speaks and the way she's um, trying to articulate her thoughts is really interesting, because it's like she's the TARDIS. The TARDIS is self-aware, and thinking, but it thinks in a different way to us, and it's kind of stuck with time travel and things like that. It's a great episode, and like I said, some of the lines in it, there's lines in this that stick in the mind, and there's lines that there's some lines that I use in my day-to-day life like all the time. And you also get to find out what petrichor is. Great episode. You then get a two-parter, which is the Rebel Flesh and the Almost People. Now, people seem to be very, very mixed on this. As two-parters go, it's not one of the best. It does have some great moments, and it has a very good cliffhanger between the two episodes. And there's a lot of quite intriguing philosophical discussions at play regarding identity and the nature of identity. But the episode, unfortunately, kind of skirts around it, and there's no definitive answers forthcoming in the episode. And I get that with a lot of philosophical discussions like this, there usually isn't any definitive answers. It's things you can argue, but it's like, I don't think the episode really takes a stand with a particular argument regarding identity. Like, there's discussions and but we kind of hear both sides of the argument, but the episode itself doesn't really kind of take a stand one way or the other. The concept of the mining acid seems like something that was come up with purely to allow for the flesh to exist in the first place. Um, oh, we need duplicates of these people. Oh, we can have them. Why would the duplicates exist? Oh, they're mining for acid. I don't get that. I don't get why they're mining for acid. Like, would what would you need acid in that amount of quantity for? Never mind. And moments like the reveal of the Doctor, though, like the because we get two Doctors, because we get the Doctor and then we get a flesh copy of the Doctor, and for all intents and purposes, he looks and acts exactly like the Doctor. So for most of the second episode, we have two Doctors, and it's kind of, well, which one's which? And Amy's kind of treating one of them like he's definitely the real one, and the other one like he's not. And then the Doctor reveals, no, we swapped our shoes. You don't know which one of us was which. And that's quite clever. And Jimmy, one of the supporting characters as well, his Ganger version has a really great arc across the two episodes, where he kind of, he states the case in the first episode that he remembers his children as well. He has all of those memories. He thinks he's real, and then real Jimmy dies, so Ganger Jimmy has to take over his role. Yeah, it works quite well. And Ganger Jen, she gets like this monster form towards the end of the episode. I'm not completely sold on it, I'm not gonna lie. It's a giant CGI monstrosity, and she's kind of charging towards them. I don't know, I just think it's a weaker part of the episode, although her manipulation of Rory is very clever. Like, she manipulates him by pretending to be the real Jen, who she's long since killed. Yeah, she's the quiet, mousy one, and she becomes the main villain. And her real self gets killed off quite casually. It's a shame. Much like the Silurian two-part last series, though, it's the final moments of the episode that actually tie into the meta plot that become the most intriguing moments, because that's where we reveal the truth about Amy's pregnancy. The whole, is she or isn't she pregnant? And it turns out, no, she is. But that's because the Amy in the TARDIS isn't the really Amy. It's a flesh copy of Amy. And that's a really great hook for the mid-series finale, because another thing with Series 6 is it was split into halves. Like, the first half aired towards the start of the year, the second half aired into the autumn. And yeah, that's a really good, like, they had the summer break in the middle. Yeah, it's really clever. I thought it was a great twist the first time I saw it. I was like, oh, and it made sense. And obviously we also get the fact that the Doctor has learned of his death because Amy revealed it to him when she thought it was the Flesh Doctor. She revealed it because she's been wanting to tell him the entire time, but River and Rory have convinced her that no, she can't. The Doctor can't know that he's going to die. He can't know his own future like that. He's a time traveler. And then we get the mid-season finale. The mid-series finale is A Good Man Goes to War. I freaking love this episode. It is one of my favorite episodes of this series. It's one of my favorite episodes of Doctor Who overall. The series went on hiatus after this episode for the summer, and it works really well as a cliffhanger. Like, it's a fantastic cliffhanger. It's a brilliant episode on its own. It's got plenty of great moments in it right from the start. We get introduced to this extended cast as the Doctor starts calling in favors. We get this amazing moment from Rory as, like, the last Centurion threatening the Cybermen That's so good. Real change of Rory as a character. We get to meet Vastra, we get to meet Jenny, we get to meet Strax, and they all go on to be fan favourites for a really good reason. We also get Lorna Bucket, who's played by the same actress, Christina Chong, who plays Lan Noonien Singh in Star Trek Strange New Worlds. She's good here. She's a very interesting character. But unfortunately, she kind of seems almost written out of the episode at one point, only to reappear at the end of it, which is a bit of a shame. There's also some really great lines and just powerful moments in this episode. You get the Colonel Runaway speech, which is fantastic. Like, the Colonel Runaway speech is one of my favorite speeches that Matt Smith's Doctor gives, and might be one of my favorite speeches in Doctor Who overall, were it not for the fact that, it probably would be top were it not for the fact that Peter Capaldi has some great lines as his Doctor. But yeah, it's a great speech. The kind of we see kind of an evolution of anger through Christopher Eccleston, David Tennant, and Matt Smith. Christopher Eccleston is sort of fresh from the Time War, and he has this kind of very red hot anger. He's very quick to anger. Like, you see that in Dalek. It's a very quick, very raging anger, because his wounds are still fresh. With David Tennant, it's not so fresh anymore, and he's kind of been healed by his time with Rose, but that anger is still there, and he can be quite angry at times. It's not as explosive as it is with Christopher Eccleston, but he can be, like, we see a good example is Family of Blood. Like, the way he punishes the family is very cool, and not cool as in cool. It's like, it's very cool and calculated, and it's a punishment, and it's an angry punishment. He's angry at them. That's why he's punishing them like that. Matt Smith's anger is a lot quieter. It's a lot more reserved. He's further away from the Time War. He's literally a completely different person. But he still cares so deeply about the people around him. And that he's able to gather an army because Amy has been kidnapped. And his Colonel Runaway speech, it's one of the angriest moments that this Doctor has, but it doesn't seem angry until right at the very end. And that's because it's so measured. Like, his anger is very much below the surface, and it explodes out of him right at the very end. But he's trying to be not kind of aloof with it, but trying to be very measured. And it's like, yeah, he is. I think it's the first time we really see Matt Smith's Doctor angry. And it won't be the last, but it's so powerful. And then we also get Dorium's speech to Madame Kavarian. That's a really good one as well, where he's like, think how many people around this universe owe that man a favor. And it's like, how many of them have had a blue box outside their door? That's a good line, because it's like, yeah, if the Doctor goes to war, he can call in favors from so many people. And we see that in this episode. Like, the pirates come back in this episode. Danny Boy comes back because the Doctor can just call in all these favors because so many people owe him one. Captain Avery and Danny Boy, and the actors as well for Vastra and Strax are both actors that we've seen before. Strax played another Sontaran back in The Poison Sky. Neve McIntosh, who played Vastra, also played Leia and the other Silurian in Cold Earth. Yeah, no, Hungry Earth. So yeah, it's great. Works really well. And you also get the final moments with River. And again, another moment where you see the Doctor angry. He's like, "Where the hell have you been?" We get this final moments of the episode between the four main players, between Amy, Rory, River, and the Doctor, and it's so good. And the reveal of who River is and the connection that she has to not just the Doctor but to Amy and Rory is fantastic. Like, it really is. I love it. And the moment where they realize, and the Doctor realizes and goes off by himself, and it's just like, Vastra, get everyone home. Vastra and River, get everyone home. And he's just like, oh. He doesn't reveal it. River reveals it, and it turns out that yes, she's their daughter. That's how the Doctor knows he's going to get Melody back, is because Melody is going to grow up to become River. Yeah, brilliant. And then you get like that's the cliffhanger, that's the break, and it's like, it's a cliffhanger, but it's not a cliffhanger because it resolves this story, but the silence still, well, yeah, the Church of the Headless Monks in this is Madame Kavarian. We don't know that she's allied with the silence yet. Like, they still have Melody, and we don't know what they're going to do with Melody, but we know it's now linked to River, so we know that the Doctor's going to get her back. Yeah, pretty good one. Like I said, one of my favorites of the series, and like I said, probably one of my favorites overall. So, Series 6 second half starts with Let's Kill Hitler, which is a very misleading title, in my opinion, because the episode barely features Hitler, which is probably for the best. Instead, the episode focuses on the regeneration of Melody, who is a new character who's introduced in this. Childhood friend of Amy's, who is responsible for kind of getting Amy and Rory together. And is obsessed with the Doctor and with Amy's stories of the Doctor. But she regenerates into River. And so it works as kind of an origin of sorts for the character, because it's Alex Kingston, but she's still Melody Pond. She's not River Song yet. She's not the character that we know as River Song yet. We also get introduced to the Tesselector. Now, the Tesselector, I think, is a really clever concept. And I like the idea of what it's trying to do. The whole idea of using time travel technology, going to the past through history and punishing those that escaped justice. People like the reason they're there is because they're here to kill Hitler, but they're just a few years too early. And it's because, Hitler committed suicide in his bunker under under Berlin in the final days of the war, the final hours of the war, really. He wasn't punished for everything he did. He escaped justice. Unlike other Nazi leadership who were brought to trial and some of whom were executed. It's like, that didn't happen to Hitler. He got to take not that suicide is a coward's way out. Like, there's a lot of reasons why people would choose suicide that are very justified, but in his case, it was a coward's way out. He chose that rather than be arrested, rather than submit to justice. And yeah, so I get why the Doctor's judging it, though. But I've got to say, I do kind of like the idea. The idea of like we get time travel technology and we're able to go and snatch people from the end of their life without disrupting the timeline. Yeah, let's do it. Some of the worst people in history that deserve punishment. There's plenty of people who, rich and powerful, who get away with so much. Um, even in the modern day, never mind throughout history, where kings and political leaders and soldiers have done so much horror and have never been punished for it. So yeah. Um, I'm unsure though why the Tesselector features the antibodies. Like, for any reason other than tension, it feels like a really poor design to work in a ship that has the capability of killing you. Like, that actually happens almost to one of the staff really early on. Like, the Enterprise doesn't have security turrets that will shoot you if you're not wearing your comm badge. So why does why does the Tesselector have these things? And it's literally only done for the dramatic tension, so that when Amy and Rory are sort of alone in the ship right at the end of the episode, or how they're able to turn the ship on the crew, that's literally the only reason it exists. But yeah, the concept of this, like, shrunk down, shape-shifting robot that's crude. Yeah, I really like the concept. I think it works really well. The Doctor also learns through the Tesselector more definitively of his coming death, which is something that Amy told him previously while thinking he was the Flesh Doctor. So, but this is where he learns more definitively about it from the Tesselector, which is quite clever and kind of sets up the arc of this part of the series of the Doctor trying to avoid that. Night Terrors is the next episode. Night Terrors is pretty good, actually. It feels in some ways like a redo of Fear Her from the last era. But I do think it's probably better. Like, it's anchored by more interesting characters, and the fact that the father in this episode is working with the Doctor to try and help George. It's good. It's good. It's a decent episode. The reveal over the true nature of George is really interesting, especially how it comes about in the episode. Whereas, like, of course not, she can't get pregnant. That's a really sudden thing. It does mean that it's a perception filter thing, which is another element that Steven Moffat can kind of, well, Steven Moffat did write this episode, but it's something else that some writers do kind of lean on, and it becomes quite pronounced in this era because it's one that gets attributed to Moffat, but Moffat isn't the one who wrote the episodes where these appear, but it happens a lot, and it happens a lot under his tenure as showrunner. So it's like, would another showrunner have let us have so many perception filters? I don't know, because like the Lodger features a perception filter as well for the house. So yeah, and the conclusion for the episode I think is really sweet. Like, it's a really sweet, solid conclusion with this family and everything kind of coming together, and the reveal of what George is. Yeah, I like it. The dolls are quite terrifying. And they're used as the main sort of horror element for the episode. So changing, ending it in a quite a nice, sweet way. Yeah, and the dolls are much more threatening than like the voice in the cupboard from Fear Her, which, like I said, is the closest episode I can think of to this one. Like, comparatively, there's just so many similarities between the two, I think. The Girl Who Waited is the next episode. This is, again, another brilliant episode. There's a lot of very good episodes this series. The Girl Who Waited is a character study on Amy, essentially. And it's got some really great moments and development in her and Rory's relationship. The concept is that she ends up separated from the Doctor and Rory and has to survive this hostile environment. And by the time they're able to catch up to her and save her, it's been like 20 years that she's been on her own surviving. And yeah, it's a dark moment. It's a really clever story. I really like this one. And some of the lines in this still stick with me. And you know, they're powerful lines and really romantic lines as well that still stay with me, and they stay with me to this day, like since the first time I saw it. You know, Amy makes this speech about beauty, which is so lovely. Like the idea of, you know, you can meet someone beautiful and then you talk to them and they're dull as a brick. And so it doesn't matter how good looking they are, it means nothing. But then you meet someone who maybe isn't beautiful, but you get to know them and they're so interesting and engaging that they become beautiful. Like you can see everything about them on their face, everything about who they are. Oh, it's just a lovely speech. And yeah, one of my favorite episodes. But yeah, that speech is beautiful. Like it does the rounds on Tumblr occasionally on a meme, and it's like not a meme, like a, you know, a very nicely framed like photo of the episode. And yeah, and there's a reason why it sticks with people, it resonates with people, and it resonates with me. And you know, it's not just that episode where Amy's talking to herself about Rory, you know, where she says, like, you know, she ends that speech with saying Rory's the most beautiful person I've ever seen. But then Rory as well has another great line where he says, you know, he's trying to get the older Amy to come with him, and you know, he says he doesn't care that she's old. What he cares about is that they didn't grow old together. And yeah, it's lovely. It's powerful stuff. You know, it's you know, and it's completely anchored on this romantic relationship between the two characters. And it's one of those episodes that really makes me think that adding Rory to the cast full time was one of the best things they did with this era. You know, I completely get why they took the decision in the previous series to erase him from time and tie it into the meta plot, because it gave that plot weight. But I'm so glad that they didn't do anything like that this season. I mean, there's a couple of times, like this is another episode where one of the characters dies, like in Night Terrors previously, like Amy ended up becoming one of the dolls for a bit, and Rory ended up dying for a bit in Curse of the Black Spot. So it's like the characters do keep dying and coming back. That becomes kind of a recurring thing. But yeah, this episode is great. And Arthur Darvill and Karen Gillan especially are both brilliant in it. Like, Karen Gillan as both versions of Amy, and some of the scenes where she's basically talking to herself. So of course that's even harder to do as an actor because there's no one there to play off of. It's yeah, tour de force, acting tour de force from her. She did a brilliant, brilliant moment, and also we get another great line from Rory, just like again calling out the Doctor by, you know, saying maybe before you take us somewhere you should check that there was a plague, maybe open a newspaper once in a while. And it's similar to some of the lines that he had in Vampires of Venice, and again shows the really good relationship between those two as well, because this is the thing in any sort of three-way relationship, you know, whether friendship or companions or anything like that, you have to focus on all of the relationships. It's not just the Doctor and Amy and that needs focus, and then Amy and Rory that needs focus. We also need some focus between Rory and the Doctor, and we also need focus of all three of them together. And we get that here, and it works. Like there was a really good. I didn't review any of the Children in Need specials while doing this because they're not on iPlayer. I really wish they were. And if they are on iPlayer somewhere and anyone knows where they are, please tell me. I would love to see them, like the Comic Relief and Children in Need specials. There was one, and I can't remember if it were, I think it must have been around Series 6. And it was a two-parter, and it was called Space and Time. So first part was called Space, second part was called Time. And due to shenanigans, the TARDIS ends up materializing inside itself. And it all comes about because of an interaction between the three of them. Like, it's a very organically done scene, and it plays off of all three of their character relationships, and it works really well. And the only reason I'm bringing it up, because like I said, I didn't review these sort of smaller episodes, even though some of them, like Time Crash, where you get the Peter Davison's Doctor and David Tennant's Doctor meeting, I know are very, very good. But this one I'm only mentioning because I saw it when it came out the first time. And it stuck with me because of how good it is. Because again, there's a line in that episode where it's like, where Amy perfectly highlights the relationship between the three of them and how that's caused the problem. It's fun. And that's what episodes like The Girl Who Waited do. It highlights not just Amy and Rory's relationship, or Amy and the Doctor's relationship, because obviously her opinion, older Amy's opinion on the Doctor has completely changed, but also highlights Rory and the Doctor's relationship as they're working together to try and rescue Amy. And then the relationship between the three of them as they try to solve things. Yeah, I like it. And I think after so many seasons where we've had the Doctor and a single companion, I like the idea when the TARDIS is a bit fuller, where we have a group of characters in there. And it's not something you see very often, unfortunately. So yeah, it's one reason why I like 11 and the Ponds, is because there's three of them and they feel like a threesome. Like you're getting all three characters and they're all richly, very well developed characters where you know how each of them is going to act in a certain situation. But we're nearly at the end of the series. So 3 episodes left. God Complex is this creepy and bizarre episode which has a very interesting cast of characters, especially Rita, who becomes like an almost companion, in the same way as Linda with a Y. Like, the Doctor seems very interested in bringing her along. And yeah, she's great. she's really good. And in fact, the Doctor seems genuinely taken with her, like very taken with her, very impressed with her in a way that we haven't seen in a long time. Like, Linda with a Y and Astrid might be the last 2 examples that I can think of. And the final reveal of the episode is quite simple, like the reveal of what the Minotaur is and what the hotel is. And it solves itself quite simply. The idea of like the rooms containing your biggest fear, and then like the contrasting, like how that contrasts faith and fear, that's quite good. And then how it means the Doctor has to break Amy's faith in him again, which he's already kind of done once before, because he did that in The Big Bang and Flesh and Stone. And yeah, it's a decent episode. We don't get to see what's in the Doctor's room, but there are probably clues later on as to what's in that room, so it doesn't really matter. But yeah, I like this one. And the way that, the ending of the episode, which is quite touching and bittersweet, with the fact that, the Doctor, as far as he knows, is that he's going to die shortly in the future. And he has to kind of break Amy's faith in him, and then he leaves Amy and Rory behind. Like, he gets them a perfect house and their dream car and everything like that, and then just leaves them behind. And the final moments between Amy and Doctor here are quite touching, and it feels a bit like Toby Whithouse is paying off some of the setup that he made back in Vampires of Venice, his previous episode, by having the Doctor realize that he's probably going to hurt Amy and Rory eventually, and so he needs to give them up now. Yeah, great little episode. Yeah, very solid conclusion. Closing time. Closing time's decent. Brings back Craig, also brings back the Cybermen. I don't think it's as good as the Lodger, though. The idea of the baby Alfie, or Stormageddon, Dark Lord of all, great inclusion. And it's nice to see that we've had some development in Craig and Sophie's relationship, like off screen. Like, Craig comes back and he's a different person. Not too different. He is still Craig. But we also see that, like, Amy has become a model for petrichor fragrance, which is lovely. And we also get some lovely moments with the Doctor. Like how he gives up. He gets involved in a thing, because despite the fact he wants to go into this event that's time locked. And we know how much the Doctor likes to see the universe. So there's this event that he's got a once only chance to see, and he gives it up to help Craig, and especially to tidy the house, because he doesn't want Craig to get in trouble with Sophie. Yeah, it's a sweet one. I wish we'd seen the Doctor interact with Sophie again, but I suppose because Craig kind of knows the truth about the Doctor. I can't remember if Sophie did. So, but yeah, it's nice and it's fun, and it's, I don't mind if we never see Craig again, because he got to interact with the Doctor twice. How many people can say that? Yeah, and he got a good conclusion. He's got a family and everything that he's dealing with now, with baby Alfie. Yeah, so it's a pretty good one. And we obviously, this is now closer to the Doctor's death, so the Doctor is, yeah. And we see some setup, like he gets the blue envelopes, which he used in Impossible Astronaut. And I think we also see him with the cowboy hat. He gets the cowboy hat here. Yeah. The Doctor should have worn a hat a lot more. And Matt Smith, there's a recurring joke that he keeps putting on a fez, like he put a fez on in The Big Bang. And, and then he has the cowboy hat throughout most of the next episode, The Wedding River Song. Or at least the bits that make sense. Because The Wedding River Song is a bit of a messy episode. It's a really interesting concept, like the idea that time is kind of stuck, like all of time is happening at once. It's really interesting. I just don't think it works as well as it should. It does have a lot of really interesting callbacks and cameos, though. Like we get Ian McNeice back as Churchill. We get Malachi, this Silurian from Hungry Earth. He comes back. Not Hungry Earth, he was in the second part. We even get Simon Callow returning as Dickens. We get the Tesselecta coming back. We get Dorium. We even get this lovely, touching tribute to the Brigadier, because the actor who played Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart had recently passed away at the time. And so we get this quite touching tribute where the Doctor tries to call him, because the Doctor's really desperately trying to avoid his death. And then it's like, no, you've missed him. The Brigadier's passed, unfortunately. It works quite well having the Doctor as like the soothsayer telling his story to Churchill, and it all being done in flashback, and it's all being like, oh, it's all because of a woman, and it's very noirish way of telling the story. As we kind of catch up to the current events, we find out sort of how time became broken. It's pretty good. I think it could be grander, considering some of the things we've seen in the past. Like, I don't know. I mean, there's elements here like the pteranodons in the park and things like that. But it's like if everything is happening all at once, it's like, well, we've seen some of the sci-fi future stuff in this. Where's any of that? You know, where's things like could we have had callbacks to other things like the game station? You know, maybe rather than just some of the stuff from this season. Although having Dickens back was pretty cool. You know, something from a previous era. But yeah, and obviously it focuses on the Silence and Kavarian, and this is where we really kind of catch up with them. I forgot to mention as well that like Kavarian was built up quite well in the first half by like we keep seeing her like watching Amy, but only Amy would see her that she was there. That was really cool. I did like that. And it kind of raised this mystery of who this woman was with the eye patch. And then in this, we see the eye patch and we bring back Amy and we bring back Rory and we bring back River. And the final conclusion as well, where we learn everything that's happened and we see how River River is the impossible astronaut. This was part of the plan that like Kavarian was behind it all. Kavarian and the Silence were behind it all. Like they had the impossible astronaut, and the whole idea of the impossible astronaut as well. It's like they needed the Silence needed a spacesuit, so they made mankind invent one. They made mankind go to the moon because they needed a spacesuit. You know, and they needed a spacesuit for River because they had the young River as a girl. They indoctrinated her. They were going to use her as the astronaut. She managed to escape from them in those first two episodes, which is why she regenerates on the streets of New York. That's where they lost her. She went off and became Melody and met Amy. And then from there became the River that we know. And obviously her interactions with the Doctor and Let's Kill Hitler is what sort of kept her separate. And then, you know, it's here where we come back and we learn all of that. And then, you know, Kavarian and the Silence are all kind of come together. And it's all because of them. And River refused. Like, she gets captured at the end of the previous episode and put back in the suit with this terrifying nursery rhyme. And we kind of see in this that, like, the Doctor goes to his death and interacts with River. Like, we see that aspect of, you know, the future Doctor talking to the astronaut that we didn't see. Like, we saw it happen, but we didn't overhear that part of the conversation in The Impossible Astronaut. We learn it all here and we learn what happens. And then, of course, we get the final reveal where, like, Amy thinks the Doctor is dead. And then River, who's having, like, these lovely wine evenings, and it's the River that's fresh from Flesh and Stone, reveals that, like, oh, no, the Doctor's fine. He used the Tesselector. That's clever. And, yeah, I think it works. I enjoy it a lot more than most other people seem to. I think the flashback stories and the emotional beats with River work really well. And then there's also bits like Amy killing Kavarian, saying, like, she didn't get it all. You know, I forgot what she says. It's a really good takedown. She's like, oh, she didn't get it all. River didn't get it all from you. Talking about the vengeance aspect. And yeah, it's good. I like it. It's a solid episode. And I think it's a good way of concluding the series. It's maybe a bit too much for an hour. But I think it could have been explored more if it was a two-parter. But I also think that the two-parter needed to be at the start. Like, I'm not sure what episode you could cut to make it a two-parter. And then we get the Christmas special as well, which is the Doctor, the Widow, and the Wardrobe, which is honestly quite a really touching and quite sweet Christmas story. It focuses on a family during wartime, the Arwells, and you know, the Doctor has bought them like a portal to a snow planet, like a snow forest, which is a really sweet idea. But like, surely the Doctor has learned by now that every time he goes somewhere, like, there's always something wrong. you know, Madge Arwell is a great character, and the Doctor in this spends most of the time with the children rather than Madge, which I think I prefer. I always like when especially for a Christmas special, I like it with the Doctors with the kids. I think it works better. Especially with this version of the Doctor, like Matt Smith's version of the Doctor is really good with children. Like most of the Doctors are, but we see Matt Smith's Doctor interact with children a lot more than we have with previous Doctors, and I think it works. I think he's really good at it. So, yeah, the episode itself is pretty good, pretty standard. Really, the mystery of the forest is good. It's decent, and it's a very Christmassy episode. And there's a lot of wartime stuff in it, which is quite sad. The ending with the Doctor returning to the ponds, I think, is a lovely capstone on this series. You know, like they've set a table for him because it's Christmas, and they always set a table for him, even though he hasn't seen them in 2 years. And like Amy squirting him in the face with a water pistol and being like, "River told us," and he's like, "Of course she did," and she's like, "She's a good girl." It's great, lovely conclusion, lots of happy crying. So much like Series 6 before it, Series 7 decides to do a bit of reinvention as well. Now, the way it does it this time is it again splits the series in half. Well, kind of. Splits into 2 sections. The first part came out 1 year, and the second part came out the next year. So this series was actually across 2 years, which hadn't really happened in Modern Who before. And so this was starting 2012. Aired 5 episodes in 2012, then had a Christmas special in the middle, then aired the remainder of its episodes in 2013. And I think it's up to 14 episodes in the end. I'm not sure if that includes the Christmas special. Don't think so. I'm not sure. But the 13th series would also include... the 2013 episodes would also include the 50th anniversary special and then another Christmas special, sort of bringing an end to Matt Smith's era as the Doctor, bringing an end to the 11th Doctor. And for the first half of Series 7 especially, each of these episodes becomes very self-contained. Like, they all have differences in the titles that give them all their own unique logo, sort of fitting in with what they're doing in that particular episode. So, for example, the first one is Asylum of the Daleks. Now, Asylum of the Daleks is a brilliant episode to bring the Daleks back with. By this point, they haven't really been featured since Victory of the Daleks, like in a title as the main villain in an episode. Like, they're present in the Pandorica Opens, and like there is one in the Big Bang, like a single Dalek which threatens them, but they've been absent for a while, and this is where we kind of bring them back. We also get our introduction to Oswin, played by Jenna Louise Coleman. Now, by this point, I think it had been revealed that Karen Gillan and Arthur Darvill were going to be leaving, and that these 5 episodes would sort of serve as their conclusion. And I think it had been revealed as well that Jenna Louise Coleman was going to take over as the next companion. So I, like a lot of people, expected Oswin to be the character that we would get. And this is a really great introduction to Oswin. Like, she's a very interesting character. We get a lot of development for her. You know, explaining sort of who she is, giving us a really good look at her personality. We get to see her interact with not just the Doctor, but with also Amy and Rory as well. We also get some really good character stuff between Amy and Rory, because it's been some time since we last saw them. And their relationship has fallen apart. And Amy instantly clocks that the Doctor has realised that and is determined to resolve it as well. Which obviously he does. He meddles. We also get the concept of Dalek infiltrators, which are a brilliant concept. Like the idea of Daleks being able to take over human bodies to infiltrate. And we get the eye stalks from the head when they reveal themselves. Yeah, it's a great concept, and it does go on to recur. So, yeah, I think you could probably do a whole episode with the Daleks based around this concept. Without giving us a full Dalek, just giving us the Dalek infiltrators. Whether that would work or not, I don't know, but it's possible. And then seeing it from Amy's perspective as she becomes infected by these like Dalek nanites, and she sees the Daleks in the asylum based on who they were before. That's a really good scene and shows just how horrifying a transformation it is. And that these people have sort of lost everything they are to become Daleks. And and then we get the reveal of that with Oswin, where we see that she's a Dalek, but she's sort of resisting the program. So the Oswin that we've seen this entire time isn't Oswin. Oswin's a Dalek. Yeah, it's good. It's clever. And seeing her hack the Dalek net and making the Daleks forget the Doctor. And now we see that in the ending, and how the Daleks have forgotten who the Doctor is. Like, that's got some interesting ideas for the future. And there's, I think there's one episode after this that reveals that like the Doctor's been deleting himself, because obviously he's pretending to be dead. So yeah, it's interesting. It's intriguing. The second episode is Dinosaurs on a Spaceship. Dinosaurs on a Spaceship is written by Chris Chibnall. It's a fun little adventure story. It's got some really great moments, as well as the introduction of Brian, who is an absolute delight, played by Mark Williams of The Fast Show and 101 Dalmatians fame. Very good actor. He just plays Brian Williams with such heart. He's absolutely, he's just brilliant. He's lovely in this. He accidentally gets swept up in the TARDIS on an adventure with Amy and Rory because he's helping them change a bulb in their house. And yeah, a lot of his interactions with Rory especially are lovely. The most This episode does conclude with it also features David Bradley as the villain Solomon. He's brilliant, and we also get Mitchell and Webb as voicing 2 robots, and obviously they work brilliantly together. They are a double act, so they work brilliantly. We do have the Doctor like actively leaving Solomon to die. Like, it's revealed this is a Silurian ship, and I do understand why, but it's like the most cruel we've ever seen the Doctor. Like, he gives the soldiers at the church the chance to run away, and they kidnapped Amy. Solomon killed a load of Silurians, but he didn't do anything as directly antagonistic towards the Doctor. So the Doctor just kind of abandoning him, to die on the ship. Yeah, it's a dark moment. And it seems almost uncharacteristic for the Doctor. The other characters that we get, I've forgotten the name of the adventurer, but he's a lot of fun. Apparently, there's some ideas for him that like he was going to die the next day, so the Doctor was like giving him this as like an adventure. Obviously, they would abandon that based on the ending where Nefertiti goes with him. But yeah, seeing him clash with Amy is quite fun, and then seeing the respect that Amy gets from Queen Nefertiti, that's quite fun as well. Yeah, I think introducing new companions, new characters like this, there's a balance to it. Like the idea that the Doctor has all these adventures that we haven't seen, because obviously this is a Doctor who's a couple of 100 years older. Like there's a massive gap in the Doctor's personal timeline between the God Complex and closing time. So he's had all these off-screen adventures, and even characters like Vastra, Jenny, Strax, when we meet those in A Good Man Goes to War, they've had adventures with the Doctor off screen, and presumably this Doctor, because it's this Doctor that they seem to recognize. So yeah, it's very interesting that we get these characters from these off-screen adventures with the Doctor, and I think it's one of those where you have to balance it just right. You're introducing these new characters that have got this history with the Doctor, but we haven't seen any of it, so it has to work just right. And in this case, I think it does, and I think they do kind of skirt around it a bit by giving most of our scenes with these new characters not with the Doctor, but with the other companions. Like, we don't see Nefertiti interacting much with the Doctor. We see her mainly interacting with Amy. So, yeah. The next episode, A Town Called Mercy, this one actually kind of makes the ending of Dinosaurs on a Spaceship worse in retrospect because of how much it contrasts with that episode. Like, he leaves Solomon to die, but in A Town Called Mercy, he does all he can to save everyone, including Carla Jex, who he clearly despises for very similar reasons as Solomon. Like, he has no compassion for Jex at all, but then still decides to keep him alive. And I wonder if part of it is because Amy and Rory were there with Jex, whereas they weren't there with Solomon. They weren't there to stop him. And that sort of echoes back to how, in The Runaway Bride, for example, how Donna is the one that tears him away from the Rachnos Empress. So that, the Doctor isn't... Like, the human companions keep the Doctor in check because the Doctor is dangerous. That's why the Doctor shouldn't be alone. Which... yeah, it becomes a recurring thing. Like, the Doctor shouldn't be alone because he's better with the people around him. And I think maybe that's what they were going for. I don't think it works as well as an execution. A Town Called Mercy isn't a bad episode by any means. It's just not the strongest. Like, there's some great bits between the main three characters, and Ben Browder from Farscape, who comes in as Isaac, he is great. He's not in the episode as long as I'd like, but he's great. And again, this seems to have been shot on location, and so it looks amazing, but it's not... Of the 5 in this section, it's not the most memorable. It's probably... like, Dinosaurs on a Spaceship is more memorable, but Town Called Mercy is probably better, but those two are at the lower end of these 5. you know, and that's because the next two are the really good concluding ones. So Power of Three, the fourth episode, is the one episode from this run that I find the most memorable. Um, but I find it memorable not necessarily for the main plot regarding the cubes and their associated threat, but from all of the character moments in the episode. Like this episode, again, it's written by Chris Chibnall. He does a brilliant job. Like, if there's any episode where I can see why Chris Chibnall became the showrunner, this is it. It's so well written. We get the introduction to Kate Lethbridge Stewart, um, who is fantastic and interacts really well with the Doctor. We get and then they're talking about the Brigadier. That's lovely. We get the moments where the Doctor talks to Amy outside the tower, and she's saying about how old they're getting, because of all the times they keep sneaking away. Brian speaking to the Doctor at their party after noticing that Amy and Rory have changed outfits, and it's just like, how long were they gone this time? And he's like, can you always keep them safe? It's a really strong piece of writing, this episode, and it's probably my favorite of Chris Chibnall's contributions that I've seen so far, because I haven't seen his era as showrunner yet, the 13th Doctor era. I haven't seen much of that at all. So how much I've heard it's not great. Let's just put it that way. So how much I might sour on him, I don't know. But when you've got episodes like this that are just this well written and this really kind of anchor in on what makes these characters good and what makes their character relationships good. Yeah. I like that. And then, of course, the run comes to a conclusion with Angels Take Manhattan, which is, again, another beautiful episode, very well shot. Again, bits of it seem to have been shot on location in America, New York, especially around this time. There's it sees Moffat kind of playing with all of his favorite toys. There's time travel and predestination, and River Song comes back, and the Weeping Angels come back, and so he's just playing with all of his favorite things to do Amy and Rory's final episode, and it is a great episode. Like, to say goodbye to Amy and Rory, like, this is a good episode for the four of them, because River is essentially like the fourth part of the TARDIS team in this series, and bringing River back, especially for this final episode with Amy and Rory, and all four of them get some great things to do. Amy and Rory especially, like their discussion on the roof is some powerful stuff, and it echoes back to some of their best scenes, across the run. Things like The Girl Who Waited, Amy's Choice, there's just this really strong relationship between them, really believable. And, they get some amazing stuff to play with. And then the scene in the graveyard as well, again, between Karen Gillan and Matt Smith, is absolutely incredible and heartbreaking, and it's a proper tearjerker of an ending, and it's good. I really like that Amy and Rory get a nice ending of a sort. Like, yes, they're sent back in time by the angels, but it's implied that they're together, and Amy started a publishing house, so they were clearly managed to survive and they were well off. And from the way they start this season, the arc they go through in it, and the way that it concludes for them, not just in this series, but across this era, like, I think Donna is probably my favorite single companion in modern Doctor Who, But and that's literally only because I can't separate the ponds. Amy and Rory, as far as I'm concerned, come together, and their story is so integral between the both of them because they're a couple, and it's the two of them together that makes the whole thing work. And it's why I think Series 6 is so strong. It's why I think these 5 episodes are so strong. Is because a lot of the stuff between the three of them. So yeah, it's a really nice ending. And River at the end saying to the Doctor, "Don't travel alone," again sort of echoes back to that, like the Doctor shouldn't travel alone. It does feel sad that obviously because Brian was introduced in these few episodes that we don't catch up with him in the aftermath. Like Amy and Rory are now lost through time. Brian's never going to see them again, and we don't see how he reacts to that. Although there was a scene written by Chris Chibnall for the DVD. I've not seen it, but it's called PS, and it involves Amy and Rory's son, adopted son, because they can't have children together because of what Kavarian did to Amy. But yeah, he comes to Brian's house with a letter from Rory explaining everything and sort of introducing his grandson. I like that. I really do. I just wish it was part of the episode, or not just a hidden extra tucked away on a DVD. Like, it feels like it should be bigger than that. So then the Christmas special, because I'll do the Christmas special here before I go into the second half of the season. And this becomes kind of a bookend with Asylum of the Daleks as well, and also introduces a lot of plot elements that will pay off in the second half of the series. It deals with the aftermath of all this for the Doctor, who is alone. In a way, he's in Victorian England with the Paternoster gang. So Vastra, Jenny, and Strax. Strax has returned to life due to something that Vastra's done. Vastra is basically a Victorian dinosaur Sherlock Holmes lady, which is very cool. Jenny's her wife, who also helps her out. And yes, Strax is like her bodyguard coachman. Strax is fun. He gets some quite fun moments in this to play up with comedy, and he gets some really good comedic moments. The episode is good. What it does, though, is it introduces Clara Oswin as the companion. Now, Clara Oswin is very interesting. There's a lot of similarities immediately with Oswin, because obviously, it is, it's still Jenna Louise Coleman, and it's she's playing the two characters in a very similar way. There's a lot of similarities between them. But Clara Oswin, who I'm going to insist on calling her Clara Oswin Oswald, but I'm going to insist on calling her Clara Oswin to differentiate her from Oswin and also from Clara, who comes later on. But Clara Oswin, the link between her and Oswin isn't made explicit to the Doctor until the very end, and that's because the Doctor never saw Oswin's face. We did, the audience did, but he didn't. So that gives the mystery for that later on. We also get the Great Intelligence, voiced by Ian McKellen, and Dr. Simeon, played by Richard E. Grant, who are great, and set up the whole idea of the Great Intelligence as an ongoing villain. And there's some very well-written moments in this episode. I was talking about Clara Oswin. I'll get to that in a minute. Clara Oswin, she's a Victorian barmaid, like Cockney barmaid, but then also works as the governess of this well-to-do Victorian widower and helps look after his children, where she comes across as very erudite and educated. It's just a really clever subversion of a lot of tropes, and shows how clever the character is, but also how deceptive she can be. But the kids are kind of in on it, which shows a real mischievous side. It's a lot of fun. A lot of fun. But yeah, and then some of the bits in the episode are just really well written. Like I said, Clara Roswin is this really great, really well developed companion. She gets some amazing moments, like where she realizes about the ladder with the umbrella, revealing the Doctor brought the umbrella out for her. The one word test as well, that is great. That's a really well written scene. Vastra says, you can only give me one word. You must answer every question I give you with one word. And it's really clever and shows how intelligent Clara Roswin is, how she thinks on her feet around that. And at one point calls out Vastra for kind of lying. Vastra says to you, because Vastra's saying it has to be one word, because otherwise you just fill the air with words and you're not actually saying anything. So at one point she says how the Doctor's not going to help, and Vastra says, do you understand what I'm telling you? And Clara Roswin just turns around and says, yeah, words. Well, not yeah, she just goes, words. And it's and Jenny seems quite taken aback by it, oh, I like her, she's smart. So yeah, it's good. My biggest issue with this episode, though, is that we don't get this version of the character, which makes some of the development seem wasted. We know that at this point that Jenna Louise Coleman's going to be the new companion. I think she was announced as the companion for the Christmas special. That was what made her inclusion in Asylum of the Daleks interesting. And it's okay, so we know she's around. There's there's things, but then they make her this impossible girl, the mystery box, which I feel is maybe a bit unnecessary. Why couldn't we just have had this version of the character? I know there have been companions that aren't from modern day Earth, but especially across Classic Who. But I haven't seen a lot of Classic Who. That's the problem. But I know there are some, Jamie McCrimmon is from 18th century Scotland, for example, or Romana, who's the Time Lady. But there's no companions in modern Who that I'm aware of that are not from modern day Earth. And so the idea of a Victorian woman who's clearly very intelligent and could easily have kept up with the Doctor, why couldn't she have joined the TARDIS? And I suppose part of it so that they're not explaining everything the whole time, but I don't know. I just would have liked it a bit more, I think. So the second half of the series starts with Bells of St. John. This is where we get our first true introduction to Clara and her first meeting with the Doctor. So the idea of Clara has kind of been set up, this whole sort of impossible girl that keeps reappearing and keeps meeting the Doctor. We get the idea of the villain is the Wi-Fi in this. And that's a really great plot on paper. It's the sort of the very everyday horror that I think Steven Moffat does really well. Things like the Vashta Narada in Silence in the Library and the Weeping Angels in Blink. The whole idea of, the dust in the light, or things that can be in the shadows, or the statues. That's the sort of stuff he does really well. And the idea of there being this evil Wi-Fi that can kind of absorb you and steal you away. The everyday horror, because Wi-Fi is so pervasive. We all use Wi-Fi all the time. But yeah, it's good. And Celia Imrie is the leader of this company that's controlling this this Wi-Fi. I like Celia Imrie. It's great to see her here. She's a good villain. But yeah, I think as companion introductions go, this does feel a bit rushed. Like, Clara's introduced really well. Like, she's working with children again. She's completely clueless on Wi-Fi. She calls up the doctor because she's been given his number, and like it's the direct number to the TARDIS. So that starts ringing. That's what Bells of St. John comes from. It's St. John's ambulance, which is on the side of the TARDIS, and it's that phone that rings. So the Bells of St. John. Monks. He was hanging in a monastery. So yeah, it's. I don't know. I think it works pretty well. I think it does rely in some aspects on what we've already seen of Clara Oswin and Oswin, to sort of inform elements about Clara. Because Clara is new, but there's a lot of kind of bits that we can assume based on the other two, or that the episode seems to assume, you know. Yeah, and then we get the twist of the episode, which is a really notable one, which is revealing that the people inside the Wi-Fi company have all been controlled, and some of them have been controlled for a long time, especially Celia Imrie's character, who has been controlled since she was a child. Like, that is a great twist, and it turns out that their boss is like the Great Intelligence, who now has Dr. Simeon's face, which means he looks like Richard E. Grant and has Richard E. Grant's voice. Like, that already sets up a really great villain for this arc without the whole mystery box stuff. Like, that just makes it, that's something that irritates me. I like that her first scenes with the Doctor, like, she looks at him like he's completely weird, because he is. I also like how the Doctor's costumes evolved. Like, that's a minor thing, but he's kind of evolved to like this Georgian frock coat from the instead of the tweed jacket, which I like. Much better look on him with the waistcoat and everything as well. I do like, though, that Clara refuses to travel with the Doctor straight away. Like, she says, come back tomorrow and ask me again. Like, that's good. I like that. And that leads into the second episode, which is Rings of Akaten. Rings of Akaten reminds me a lot about The Beast Below, because it seems to use the whole idea of a child needing help as the hook to bring in both the companion and the Doctor. But in this case, it's Clara that the child bonds with, rather than the Doctor. And so this episode probably does more to introduce Clara and develop her than the first episode did. Where she, in the first episode, she had to be rescued twice straight away, whereas in this, she's a lot more authoritative straight away. Again, some really good moments in it. Like, the concept of the emotional currency on this market planet, that is really clever. Like, you have to buy something, you have to give away something with emotional value, sentimental value to you. It's like, that's really clever. That's a really clever idea. That, I don't know, could have been used a lot more, I think. And then you get the Doctor's speech towards the monster. The monster in this, I don't think is great. Like, it's a face, an evil face in a sun. I don't think the visual really works for it. I mean, there is like an actual monster in the episode, but that monster is not the villain. Like, the villain is this giant cosmic entity that we don't really get an explanation of. We also get the opening scenes as well, which show the leaf and how that led to Clara's birth and the Doctor kind of hanging around. Makes him look like a bit of a stalker, hanging around Clara's parents as they sort of fall in love and just popping in at moments of their life. But it introduces the concept of this leaf, and then how Clara's able to use that leaf as like the emotional currency to appease the entity at the end of the episode. Like the entity tries to take all of the Doctor's like pain, and then instead like Clara introduces the whole idea of like possibility and how that's much stronger. And again, it's an example of the companions make the Doctor better. Like the Doctor has one approach, but his approach is in similar way to like Victory of the Daleks. Like his approach is too pessimistic, and it needs the companion to come up with the more hopeful option. Again, like Beast Below as well. But yeah, great episode. Music in this is really good. Like there's a lot of music in this episode, and like the unending song that's sung by the monks, and then like the young girl comes in as a singer as well, and she sings her own song. Yeah, it just works really well. Not a bad episode by any means, but I just think it's one of the one of the weaker ones in this half. And probably in this series overall. Cold War is the third episode. I really like Cold War. It's a very tense little episode. It brings back the Ice Warriors. Now, again, the Ice Warriors are another classic Doctor Who villain. In this, they do it in a very similar way to Dalek, which is that they give us one Ice Warrior in a locked location against soldiers and show just how deadly that single one is on its own, while also showing new things for the Ice Warriors. So, like in Dalek, we got to see, for example, the Dalek flying, so it was going up and down the stairs. We got to see the balls being used as an energy field, things like that. In this, we see an Ice Warrior out of its armor, which is apparently a great shame for them. And just the tension that creates. The supporting cast in this episode is also really good, which definitely helps. The late David Warner, especially, is his character as the Professor. He's great. Like, I love the fact that he meets time travelers and he asks about, whether Ultravox are going to split up, because it's like, you could ask anything about someone from the future. All he wants to know is, does his favorite band split up? Like, I love it. That's one of my favorite time travel elements, I think, in anything. Just that's all he cares about. Does his favorite band split up? Because at the time it looked like they were going to. Not the Cold War, not not what's the future of Russia, the Soviet Union going to fall or anything like that. No, his only concern is his favorite band going to split up. Love it. It's just a great episode. It's from Mark Gatiss as well, and I will say my opinion on Mark Gatiss's work on the series so far has been mixed. Like, either within the episode itself, like Night Terrors or Victory of the Daleks, which both have like high and low points, or the episodes themselves going from a high to a low. Like The Unquiet Dead in Series 1 was a very good episode, but Idiot's Lantern in Series 2 was awful. It's like one of my least favourite episodes of Doctor Who ever. So to see this episode, which is a really good one, I think it's probably my favourite one of his so far. So yeah, especially because Mark Gatiss is this huge Doctor Who super fan. I want to see him write good episodes. I don't want to hate his episodes. Hyde, decent episode. It's a ghost story essentially, but one that creates a mystery. Again, excellent supporting cast. Like Dougray Scott's in this. In fact, many of the episodes this series have just really good supporting casts. Either big names or just like really, good, like, oh, I know that person from that thing. People you've seen before that are just character actors. Lots of that guy actors. And yeah, it's a good one. The monster design is probably the weakest aspect of this episode. Like, the storytelling isn't bad, it's just outshone by some of the others. But the monster design, I think, is pretty weak. And I like the idea of it using an actual psychic. Like, because we've seen the Doctor's own psychic abilities, so we know psychics are possible. So the idea of seeing a human psychic and trying to use her and her powers to connect to this ghost, yeah, it's good. It's again probably another one of the weakest episodes in this series, which is a shame because both Rings of Akaten and this were both written by Neil Cross. Neil Cross created Luther. Luther is a great show. So the fact that those episodes, are coming from this really strong pedigree, but are two of the weaker aspects of this series, I think is a shame. Because, like I said, they're not bad episodes at all. Like, they're really not. It's just that the other episodes are that good. Journey to the Center of the TARDIS, though, this is probably my least favorite in this half. I'm just not a fan of a lot of elements in it, especially the supporting cast. And I think because Doctor Who, the way the format of the show works is we have this small recurring cast, the small main cast of like the Doctor and their companions. So in this case, two. It's Matt Smith and Jenna Louise Coleman. And then they drop in on people. And how engaged you will be with a serial, with the story of Doctor Who, depends on how engaged you are by the plot and the characters. And some of that comes down, a lot of that comes down to writing, some of it comes down to the performance. Like, these actors are great. I just, like, they're playing their roles very, very well. I just don't like the characters. I don't think, like, they're written to be pretty unlikable. And it's not a bad thing. I was like, the episode itself is pretty good. Like, the best stuff in this episode probably comes from the Doctor and Clara in the TARDIS itself, because they add a mystery element to it. You've got like the varying time loops. You've got a lot of ideas that we kind of saw in the Doctor's wife in a lot of ways, showing the TARDIS as like intelligent and trying to keep them safe, and even reusing sets from that episode for some of the lower areas. But we get to see, like, the TARDIS is powered by a sun. We get to see that. In fact, my biggest disappointment with this whole episode is the fact that it just gets undone at the end. I mean, there's a little hint that maybe the supporting cast maybe kind of learned something, but those two brothers, they were dicks. Did not like them. So yeah, it's kind of all I've got to say about it. Not a fan of it. Crimson Horror, though, which is the third from the end for this series, I really like. Crimson Horror is basically the Paternoster Gang episode. It's a really great episode for them. Like, for the first chunk of it, like the first third, it's pretty much focusing on them. So it's Vastra, Strax, and Jenny. And it keeps the Doctor and Clara to the background for like quite a large part of it. And yeah, we get to see the Paternoster Gang investigating a mystery. Jenny goes undercover. We see Vastra and Strax and what they can do. It's fun. And we also get, again, a great supporting cast. Diana Rigg comes in as Mrs. Gillyflower, and she is sublime. She is just spectacularly hamming it up. Like, she's got this really great line where, like, the Doctor says that what she's got, this weapon she's had, is really dangerous in the wrong hands. And she holds up her hands and says, "Do you know what these are, Doctor? The wrong hands." Love it. It's just like a really fun villain line. Um, and her real life daughter, Rachel Sterling, plays her daughter in the episode. Apparently, it was like the first time the two of them have actually acted together. And I think they're really good in this. Again, Rachel Sterling, she's one of those I've not seen in many things. I think the first thing I saw her in was the first thing that most people saw her in, which was Tipping the Velvet, which was a very good series. Sort of got headlines for being, intense and graphic lesbian love story set in Victorian England, but it's very funny and has some great character moments, and she is playing the lead role in it, and she's very good in it. So seeing her in this, she's a good actress, and I've seen her in dramatic roles since and stuff. She's a lot of fun. So she playing Ada, who is Mrs. Gilliflower's daughter, and she just does not deserve everything that's happened to her, like everything she's gone through. And it's all kind of revealed to us piecemeal throughout the episode, and a lot of it's kind of implied. But she's quite a tragic figure in this. And then, of course, the Doctor and Clara both come back and get involved as well. And the conclusions of the episode seals 5 of them coming together. We see Strax running down a corridor in full battle armor, firing his laser cannon. Yeah, it's just fun. It's good to see all of the team working together. And then obviously Vastra, Strax, and Jenny's reaction to seeing Clara, because obviously the last Clara they saw was Clara Oswin, and they're like, well, what does that mean? Yeah, and it's clear from this episode, I think, that a spin-off of the Paternoster Gang would be a lot of fun. So yeah, I still hold out hope that that's something we'll get. I don't know if Big Finish have done it for the audio stories, but yeah, like it's kind of irritating that there were no real spin-offs during this era of Doctor Who, because um the first, like the Russell T Davies era, obviously we had the spin-offs with Sarah Jane Adventures and Torchwood, and Torchwood eventually came to an end. Like there was a couple of years between a couple of the series. John Barron was off doing a lot of other acting and stuff like that, so he wasn't always available. And Sarah Jane Adventures obviously came to a conclusion with the untimely passing of Elizabeth Sladen. But otherwise, I think would have gone on for quite a while. But there were no spin-offs in this era. And it's like the Paternoster Gang were right there. Like, really, like, low-hanging fruit on the totem pole. And they're not the only low-hanging, obvious idea for a spin-off. Like, there's more that will come up. But it's so easy that they're there that we could have got more of them. I'd have loved to have seen more of them. I still would like to see more of them. And yeah, this episode's also from Mark Gatiss as well. Another great one from him. Then we get Neil Gaiman's second episode, which is called Nightmare in Silver, and is a return of the Cybermen. Again, I really like this episode. The worst part of it is that the Doctor kind of gets sort of forced by Clara into taking the kids along. And yeah, these kids aren't nice. Like they could be a lot worse, but they seem like quite manipulative, in the way they're acting here. But the highlight of the episode is the Doctor being part assimilated by a Cyberman. And so you get this cyber controller personality called Mr. Clever inside the Doctor. And they're verbal sparring and dueling between each other. Works really well. But it also kind of sidelines the Doctor for a lot of the episode, which means we need to see Clara take charge and work with the soldiers. And this is like a penal battalion who are working at this this amusement park, this closed down amusement park, and it's like this in this world, in this history, humans have had this long drawn out war with the Cybermen, and it's clear that that war took humanity to a lot of quite dark places. Like Warwick Davis's character Porridge, again, love Warwick Davis, great actor. I think he's great in this. He's a lot of fun. Actually, no, I mean, great actor is probably a bit of an overreaction. He's not the best actor, but he's charming, and I like his performance. He's one of those. He's capable enough to perform a role quite well. You know, but yeah, he's in this, and his character's good. Like the fight, there's a bit where he's talking about like this galaxy that they destroyed. Like they destroyed a whole galaxy to stop a Cyberman army. That's insane. And then like the final moments in the episode for him are really good. There's a twist about him, and it reveals quite a lot. But he gets a lot of scenes with Clara, and the two of them play off each other really well. So yeah, I probably have, again, another character that I'd probably have liked to see return, along with like Madge Arwell and Canton Everett Delaware. You know, just bringing some of these great characters back. You know, I mean, not every character does need to come back, but when a character who is just a one-off is written this well and played this well and is quite interesting to see, you know, I can't help but want more. And yeah, it's just this idea that the Cybermen did a lot of damage in their war, you know, and seeing them upgrade on the fly, which makes them very similar to the Borg in Star Trek. Like they're just this implacable, constantly adapting threat that can't be stopped, can't be overwhelmed. Yeah, it's good. It's a really good one. It makes the Cybermen threatening again. It makes them quite terrifying, to be honest. And it's just a fun story. And then that leads into the final episode of the series, which is Name of the Doctor. And the opening of this episode is great. Like Clara falling through like a time vortex and her being superimposed in footage of like old doctors, and they just insert her in various outfits into old footage. It's not flawless. Like she's obviously a lot cleaner than the footage around her a lot of the time. You know, so it makes some of the compositing look a bit rough, but it's a really good idea and I really like it. And it's obviously intended to tie towards the 50th, which was approaching. You know, we knew we were going to get a 50th anniversary special. The main thrust of the episode itself, though, actually brings back plenty of recurring characters. Like we get all of the Paternoster gang back, we get the Great Intelligence back, we even get River back, and it's great to see them all again. You know, especially River, who gets some really good interactions with Clara, because it's River, but it's River after she died, after she's been stored in the library. So she's there, but she's not there, which is great. There's a really good mystery around Trenzalore. You know, the whole idea of this is where the Doctor's going to end up. This is where the Doctor's going to be buried. That's a really good concept. Like, it's his grave. Like, the TARDIS is there. And how we get, you know, memories that Clara shouldn't have. Like, in Journey to the Center of the TARDIS, the Doctor sort of revealed everything to her about how she's this impossible girl, and he keeps running into her and she keeps dying. And obviously, because that was undone, she forgot about it. Now she learns it again. Yeah, it's good. And it's an interesting loop because obviously that then informs the ending of the episode. The Great Intelligence's plan, very kind of timey-wimey, but I do quite like it. The idea of him going into the Doctor's timeline and kind of undoing the Doctor everywhere. But then obviously we've seen what happens when you undo the Doctor. The stars go out. The Big Bang, we saw it in Pandorica Opens. Everything goes wrong. And that becomes really easily apparently very quickly via Vastra, because Jenny just disappears because the Doctor wasn't around to save her. And yeah, Clara's determination to go into the time stream and change it, despite the fact that it could probably kill her, that's a really good moment for the character. And I actually don't mind that we don't see the details of her interacting with the old Doctors, because that would be, as awesome as it would be a logistical nightmare to try and pull all that off. But yeah, and then we get the final interaction between River and the Doctor, which is just lovely. It's this brilliant epilogue to their journey together. Revealing that he can always see her, but he thought it would be too hard to talk to her. Like, that's quite nice, and I like their relationship, and I like everything with it. So yeah, that's fine. The ending is a bit of a Deus Ex though, because like the Doctor is able to sort of enter. It's kind of unclear what's happening. Like, Clara's lost inside the Doctor's time stream, so the Doctor goes into and rescues her. I don't really know how. But yeah, a bit of a Deus Ex, but it does leave quite an interesting hook for the anniversary, which is that it introduces John Hurt as the Doctor, but a Doctor that the Doctor is really ashamed of. He says that, this episode is called The Name of the Doctor. We don't ever learn the Doctor's name in this episode, but he says, like, the name is a promise. And he says John Hurt's Doctor is the Doctor that broke the promise. And so we conclude this era of the Doctor with the anniversary special and the Christmas special. And this was all stuff done for the 50th anniversary. There's one more thing I'm going to talk about beforehand. The 50th anniversary was a lot of classic Doctor Who fans did point out that for the 50th anniversary special, and bearing in mind the special wasn't the only thing that celebrated the 50th anniversary of Doctor Who. Like, we also had a couple of the classic Doctor actors came back and did like a bit of a fun documentary behind the scenes type thing that were with it was Colin Baker, Peter Davison, and Sylvester McCoy. There was the Adventures in Time and Space series, which saw David Bradley playing William Hartnell, and showed sort of the origins of Doctor Who, and things like that. But one of the more interesting things we got was Night of the Doctor, and that was because a lot of the like I said, a lot of the classic Doctor Who fans were saying that classic Doctor Who had been kind of sidelined for the 50th anniversary special, because the only returning Doctor that appears is David Tennant. It's focused much more on John Hurt's character of the Doctor and like this hidden chapter of the Doctor's story. Night of the Doctor, though, features the return of Paul McGann as the 8th Doctor. Now, Paul McGann only appeared so far in the Doctor Who television movie in 1996, which was like the attempt at bringing back Doctor Who after it had been cancelled for the first time. So, despite being the incumbent Doctor for the longest time, he's had appeared in the least amount of stories, like officially. It's been in a lot of Big Finish stuff. And this was the idea of bringing him back as the Doctor. And it's the only mini episode that's been made that's available on iPlayer. And so I watched it as part of this. And I love it. Like, there's been talk quite a lot about bringing back Paul McGann and having him do like an actual series of Doctor Who. Like, they're still talking about it now. now Russell T Davies is talking about like expanding Doctor Who again. Like people say, "Oh, give us that Paul McGann series," um, which could be fun. It could be a lot of fun. Don't get me wrong, but I think Steven Moffat decided not to do it because obviously by this point we knew Matt Smith was going to be leaving the show, and that I don't think we knew yet that Peter Capaldi would be the next Doctor. Actually, we must have done because he has a cameo in the special. So we knew that Peter Capaldi was going to take over as the next Doctor. So Stephen Moffat didn't want two doctors running at the same time to try and especially with Peter Capaldi being new because it would kind of detract from that. But yeah, the special, it's very short. It's only like 4 minutes. But we get to see Paul McGann come in as the Eighth Doctor. We get to see him quite instantly taken with Cass, who he's come to the aid of, and then just her horror at the realization that he's a Time Lord and how she insists on dying rather than going with him because the Time War is that dark. She says, "Who can tell the difference between the Time Lords and the Daleks now?" And then you get some great moments from him as the Doctor, like the Sisterhood of Khan come in and they're calling him to action because the Time War is that desperate, that dark at the minute. They want him to come back. And they said, "Look, we can help you. We can sculpt your regeneration. We can turn you into whatever you need to be. You need to intervene in the war before the war ends everything." And you have like 4 minutes to live, and the Doctor's like, 4 minutes is plenty of time. There's so much I could do in 4 minutes. I could read a book, put up a shelf, um you know it's just that Doctor boasting. We saw elements of that where he was dying in Let's Kill Hitler as well, where it's like the Doctor is just like boastful in the face of death, ridiculously confident. I love it. And yeah, I do wish more of the mini-sodes were on iPlayer. I wish there was more stuff with Paul McGann as the Doctor. I know there's a lot of Big Finish stuff, and I'm really looking forward to getting into that at some point. I just need to find a really good way to access it. Like, it's a shame. I don't know if Big Finish do a streaming service. They should. Like, I would pay a subscription to stream all the Big Finish stuff. But I don't know. But then that leads into Day of the Doctor, which is the 50th anniversary special, and it's great. It is. It's just great. It's the right mix of dramatic and comical. It's feature length. Well, I say feature length. It's about 75 minutes, which, considering a normal Doctor Who episode is about 45 minutes to an hour, is significantly longer. So I think in America it would have showed us like a 90-minute episode with adverts and things like that. So I think that's why they went for that time frame. So it's good. So it allows the story to develop properly, and there's a lot happening here, but none of it feels wasted. None of it feels unnecessary. There's a lot of plot lines going on. Clara has developed into a teacher, which is something that kind of fits with her experience with kids, like in Rings of Akaten, where she went to the like. I can see Clara becoming a teacher. Like, some people were saying I was like out of left field, and I'm like, no, it's really not. There's elements of that there. We get scenes in the Time War, like the fall of Gallifrey. Gallifrey itself being attacked in the last days of the Time War by the Daleks. We get to see John Hurt's Doctor, the War Doctor, kind of standing against them and writing "No More" on the walls angrily, and running off to this barn in the middle of nowhere. We get to see David Tennant's Doctor in Elizabethan England. There's a lot going on here, but it all works. Yeah, the 3D painting I think is a great conceit. Like, it's the whole idea of, and they use it brilliantly to carry us into the Time War flashback. The idea of, like, it's a microcosm of time. It's Time Lord art. It's a whole scenario there in the painting. It's not just a painting. And it works quite well with stuff we've sort of seen in the End of Time, in the Time War flashback. They mention that the president has, like, locked himself in a room with the War Council, which we see in the End of Time. Like, Rassilon has hidden himself away with the leadership, so the other generals on Gallifrey are kind of, like, left on their own. We bring back Billie Piper. She's not playing Rose, though. She's playing the moment. Like, she's personifying the moment itself, which is this weapon that the War Doctor wants to use to end the Time War. But it's like, she's the moment, but she's taken the impression of Billie Piper as the bad wolf. And so she's appearing to the War Doctor to talk to him. And I like the echo back to Bad Wolf, but it's like, I think I've seen people think that she actually is the Bad Wolf Rose, and it's like, she's not. She's the moment. The moment took the idea of Bad Wolf from the Doctor because she can kind of see through his timeline. But yeah, she's good in this. A very different character to Rose, much more playful and kind of whimsical and very mischievous. She's like almost like a kind of evil fairy. There's some very powerful foreshadowing as well, showing the War Doctor wrestling with what to him are the future implications of everything that we've already seen. The Doctor surviving the Time War. Like, what will that do to him? He survives the Time War. He burns Gallifrey and the Daleks and ends the Time War. What will that do to him? And we've seen that. We've seen that with Eccleston and Tennant and Smith. We've seen what it does to the Doctor. The introduction of the Elizabeth and Zygon plots. Initially, it's kind of a fun diversion. Again, it's another told in flashback until everything kind of intersects. Yeah, all done with, the Doctor and Clara going to unit, and that's where everything kind of jumps into the past and so on. It's clever. I like it. Yeah, it's good to see the Zygons come back again. Another classic Doctor Who enemy that we haven't seen in a while. In modern Who. And yeah, we get to see David Tennant back as the 10th Doctor, which is a pleasure. And this is quite obviously one of his lost final adventures, before he regenerates, because he ages a couple of years between Waters of Mars and the End of Time. And so for him, this episode happened around then. And it's him with a younger version of Elizabeth, played by Jessica Page. And she's a lot of fun. Because we'd seen him interact with an older version of Elizabeth in the Shakespeare Code. And she recognized him, but he didn't recognize her. And he was like, Martha was like, well, what's that all about? And he says, I don't know, can't wait to find out. Now we find out. So yeah, that's quite fun. It's quite good to see Unit again. We get Kate, we get mention of Malcolm, even though we don't see him, obviously from Planet of the Dead. We get the introduction of Osgood. Osgood's a lot of fun. Played by Ingrid Oliver. She's a lot of fun. The interaction between the three Doctors is fascinating. They've all got really good chemistry together. Basically, like a time travel thing ends up so that the War Doctor meets the 10th Doctor meets the 11th Doctor, and they all kind of team up together. And yeah, they've got good chemistry together, because it's like John Hurt's the oldest actor, but the youngest Doctor. Matt Smith is the youngest actor, but the oldest Doctor. And then you've got Tennant in the middle. And there's a lot of good stuff between them. Like, it's a testament to both the writing and the acting. Like, ideas like, how long does it take to forget the children? Like, how many children were on Gallifrey when you activated the moment? Did you ever count? And it's like, yeah, the Doctor did count. One day he did sit down and count. It's dark. There's a lot of dark moments, and it's like, while this is happening, they're in the Tower of London, and like the Doctor's just marking something, and we don't know what he's doing. And then like that gets revealed when we catch back up to Clara and Unit. We go to the Black Archive, and the idea that Unit has assessed every companion of the Doctor's because they're a possible security risk. And we see pictures of like Kate with a lot of the companions, or like other companions on the wall. It's clever. And then like they make them forget. Yeah, that's pretty good. The Zygon plot becomes the main part for this. This is where like the time travel story uses the Zygons as the main threat, because that's the story that these two Doctors sort of end up working on. Like, what David Tennant's Doctor was dealing with Elizabeth leads directly into what Unit summoned Matt Smith for. And so the two Doctors solve that story by making the Zygons forget who they are. So you have like a Zygon version of Kate and Kate in like a standoff with like a nuclear bomb. And it's like he makes everyone in the room forget whether they're human or Zygon, so that they hammer out a peace treaty that's completely fair. Very clever. And that works as a really good like Doctor Who plot in and of itself. Like, there's a lot of time travel stuff. Like, it's a good story for a multi-Doctor one. Jumping around and having these two Doctors come to the same conclusion. I like it. But then you still have to resolve the story with the War Doctor in the moment. And the Doctor, like the War Doctor, goes back and finds himself back in the shed with the moment. And you get probably his best line, which is that great men are forged in fire. It is the privilege of lesser men to light the flame. It's like he's seen what the Doctor becomes after him, and he sees that, to him, they are better than he is. So he's proud of what they've become, even though it's of what he has to do for it to happen. Yeah, and then the whole scene with the other two Doctors come in with him and saying like, we shouldn't be able to come here, but like we can, and we can help. You shouldn't have to do this alone. Like, there's just this emotional roller coaster. Like, we're going from kindness to tragedy to hopeful to triumphant. And then, they put their plan into action, and we see all the Doctors, first, done through archive footage, the first Doctor, the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, even the 12th Doctor. We get the first look at Peter Capaldi in his TARDIS with his really intense eyebrows, just a nice focus on his eyes, as he's helping the Doctor. It's good, and the way it all comes together, how they use the Time Lord art, and yeah, there's just a lot of really good moments. And it ends with this really nice conclusion, because it's like, it turns out they've saved Gallifrey. Gallifrey didn't get destroyed at the end of the Time War. The War Doctor won't remember when he regenerates, And we see him at the end, his final scene, starting to shift to Eccleston. There's a bit of facial morphing to make it look like Eccleston's in the episode, because Eccleston didn't return. And like the 10th Doctor won't remember either. And it's like it's like a conceit of the multi-Doctor stories that the Doctor will only remember when he catches up to his personal timeline. So only from this point will the Doctor remember that Gallifrey is safe. 10th and 9 won't remember, and 11 before this won't remember, because it's only now that he's got the memory, despite the fact that the War Doctor and the 10th Doctor lived through it. It's because the timelines are out of sync. It's a really clever idea. I like it. It kind of gives rules to the time travel stuff in this, which works for me. And then we get the final bit, which is the introduction of the curator, which is played by Tom Baker, and the idea that this is possibly a future version of the Doctor, and gives us kind of a great hope for the future. And it's a bit of a shame that he's the only classic Doctor to reappear in the actual episode itself, but I think just based on his fame as the Fourth Doctor, it's completely understandable why it's him that they chose. And obviously they don't have him appear as the Fourth Doctor because he's a lot older, so they have him as the curator. I like it. And then that leads to the final special, which is the Time of the Doctor, the final Matt Smith story. And it's a good one. It brings together a lot of ongoing plot threads that have been in this era of the series, sort of creating a very good delineation between the 11th and the 12th, which is another reason why I'm separating these two episodes. My episodes, why I'm doing one episode on the 11th Doctor, then another episode on the 12th. And it's because, it's just too much to do it all at once, for starters. But also, they're very clear, very defined eras. There's not much overlap between them. Now, we do get a lot of Moffat's kind of signature non-linear predestination time travel storytelling in this, like the fact that Clara keeps leaving and interacting with the Doctor. We get the explanation of where the Kavarian Church of the Silence came from, the one that threatened the Doctor in Series 6, as well as all the jumps in time that we get at the town of Christmas. And the thing is, what happens is we end up on Trenzalore at the town of Christmas. There's a truth field in place, and there's a crack in the wall. And from that crack is being broadcast a question. The question was hinted at the end of season 6. It's like the first question, the oldest question in the universe: Doctor Who? And the Doctor's in an area where he can't lie. And yeah, it's the Doctor has to stay there. He ends up stuck in one place, for so long, protecting this town from all of his enemies, even teaming up with the Silence at one point. Like, the Silence themselves are just the preachers of this, the people you go to for confessional at this church. They're not all evil. It's literally the Kavarian element that was evil. So yeah, it's clever. We bring back Daleks. The Doctor becomes known to the Daleks again. We get the Dalek infiltrators. Like, we get the leader of the church that the Doctor's teamed up with, played by Orla Brady, from Star Trek Picard. She gets replaced with an infiltrator at one point, but then she's able to like fight the Dalek and actually able to help the Doctor and send the TARDIS to bring Clara and things like that, because the Doctor sends Clara away like a couple of times, and then like she's stuck there Christmas Day with her parents and everything like that. But yeah, there's some really interesting ideas here, like the whole idea of the truth field and like the two of them confessing who they are and just being completely unprepared for it. Or the wooden Cyberman, and it's like, well, the sonic screwdriver doesn't work on wood, so the Doctor actually has to outthink it and trick it into destroying itself. Yeah. And then, of course, there's the idea that, well, the Doctor can't just regenerate. And it's like, well, why not? And it's like, because Tennant regenerated. Like, they explain that. They say that the War Doctor counts as a Doctor. So Matt Smith isn't technically the 11th Doctor. He's the 12th Doctor. He's the 12th iteration of the Doctor. But the Time Lords have, like, 12 regenerations. So he should still be able to regenerate again into a 13th Doctor, but into a 13th iteration of himself. But he can't, because David Tennant regenerated in Journey's End. And it's like, David Tennant regenerated but kept his face. So a lot of people were like, well, did that count? Because it's like he put all the excess energy into his hand, and then that led to the 10-2 Doctor hybrid. And it's like, no, that does count. Fan theory, what if he kept his face because he just got Rose back, and knowing how Rose reacted the last time he changed his face? Yeah. But yeah, because it led to the Meta Crisis Doctor, it should count. So it does. And that means this Doctor can't regenerate anymore. So, and then Clara has to be the one that delivers. You know, she's the one that deals with the crack, which Gallifrey is on the other side of. You know, she deals with it. And she says, just help him. And the Time Lords do. They give him a whole new regeneration cycle. There's this explosive release of energy that takes out the Daleks in this big dramatic fashion. And then we got the young Matt Smith again, because he's covered under all this like aged makeup. So we get a young Matt Smith again in the TARDIS with Clara for the last scene. And he gets some amazing lines, like, you know, we're all stories all throughout our lives, and, you know, things like that. It's a really great speech. The only issue I have with it is that because of the way it's been shot, it feels like it's being delivered directly to the audience rather than to Clara, which is a bit of a shame. Like, the Doctor is looking directly at us, directly down the camera. But I suppose that's also probably not too dissimilar with Tennant's final line, you know, where he's like, I don't want to go. And we do get this really nice little cameo for Amy and Amelia. Although I don't think it was the same actress for Amelia, because you only see her from the back, and obviously she'd grown up a few years since. Yeah, and we get this really sudden and less dramatic change to Capaldi, which works, I think. I think that's because we'd already had the drama to get rid of the Daleks, so the change to Capaldi is a lot quicker. I don't think his first lines are particularly endearing, but yeah, it's fine. It works really well as a conclusion to the era. I think especially when you compare it to the series finale, Name of the Doctor, and especially the 50th anniversary special, like, it feels like between the three of them, they're telling one long story. You know, we go to Trenzalore, we go through the timeline, we learn about the War Doctor, we deal with the War Doctor, then we're back at Trenzalore. And we get the end of the Doctor, and it's all to do, like, the reason why he's on Trenzalore in the first place fighting this battle is because of Gallifrey, which happens in the 50th. The 3 episodes work really well together as like a loose trilogy of sorts, like Name of the Doctor, Day of the Doctor, and Time of the Doctor all work as a trilogy. Night of the Doctors should be in there as well, because you need a bit of Paul McGann. But yeah, great conclusion. So, like I said, I watched all of this when it first came out. Like, I was a Doctor Who fan by this point. It wasn't a case of going back and rewatching the episodes like I did with the Russell T Davies era. I really like Matt Smith's era as the Doctor. The 11th Doctor era. I really like his version of the character. I love the Ponds. I even don't hate Clara. Like, I'm not a huge fan of the mystery box thing with the Impossible Girl, but I get what they were going for, and it was something that tied into the whole idea of the 50th anniversary. Like, those final 3 episodes, I mean, the 50th is great. Like, Matt Smith really lucked out that he got to end around the 50th year. That was when he decided to step down. Because it means that he's the Doctor in the 50th anniversary special. I don't think you can ever take that away from him. You can't. It's great. And he works really well. It's a good special. Like, that special stands on its own. But when you put it with the rest of the era, and especially the episodes either side of it, works fantastically well. But yeah, I liked these episodes. Like I said, I still like Matt Smith. He's one of my favourite Doctors. He's had a bit of a troubled career. Like, he went on to do a lot of acting in Hollywood. And he ended up keep getting roles in stuff, but his roles got really cut down or just removed outright. Like, he was in Terminator Genesis, and I think most of his stuff got cut. He was in Rise of Skywalker, and then his role got cut, like completely cut. Like, I think he's still in Genesis for a little bit, but he's not in Rise of Skywalker at all. He then got cast in Morbius, which he did a Marvel film because Karen Gillan had told him how much fun she'd had working on Guardians of the Galaxy. So he decided to do a Marvel film, and he ended up in Morbius. And he's clearly having a load of fun with it. Like, he plays the villain and he does it quite well. But yeah, not a great movie. He's definitely one of the better things in it, but it is not a great movie. So it's only really recently with House of the Dragon that he's really found a lot of success outside of Doctor Who. But I think it's deserved. I think he's a very good actor, and I think his portrayal of the Doctor was very good. He's able to do comedy, drama really well, and to flip between the two effortlessly. And yeah, part of it was the writing in this series, these series as well, but a lot of it was just him and his strength as an actor. So yeah, this is one of my favourite eras of Doctor Who. Like, I think I actually liked this era a lot more on a rewatch. Like, going back and rewatching it here, I was just reminded how good some of these episodes are. And there's a lot of nice bits tying them together, like when he regenerates, like his final speech brings back the music from Rings of Akaten over his, goodbye to Amy. And it's like, it wasn't part of that episode. Like, Amy wasn't part of that episode. But it fits with what they're doing and what they're building towards. So, yeah. Yeah, it was a good run. A really good run.
And yeah, going back and rewatching these episodes, I held quite a lot of them in high regard anyway. But despite the fact I did have problems with some of them, going back and rewatching them and going, oh, that's bad. Oh, that trope again. Oh, okay, we're gonna do that, are we? Okay, we've done that again. But they're still good. They are the good episodes. And so next time we cover Doctor Who, we're going to see if this streak remains when we go into the 12th Doctor. Played by Peter Capaldi. So stick around, that's going to be in a few episodes' time, and hopefully you'll enjoy that as well. Until next time, my friends, you all look after yourselves, take the very best care of yourself that you can, look after your physical and mental health, and just do whatever you can to enjoy. Give yourself those little things, those little rewards to enjoy your life, because you're worth it and you deserve it. Until next time, bye for now.
Thank you, my friends, for once again joining me on Garhdo Goes Geek. Your continued support for this podcast means the absolute world to me, and I am grateful for every single one of you who stays and listens to one of my episodes. It means the absolute world. Now, if you would like to engage more with me or the podcast, we have a Discord community, small but growing, and we now have commissions open on Ko-Fi. So if there's a topic you would like to see me cover, you can pay me to cover it. All funds will be used for legal purchase of the relevant items where I do not have them. Have a look on the link tree for more information. Until next time, look after yourselves.